Is there anything I can do to help? Well, thanks. That's nice of you. My husband looks relieved to see me in a good mood. Help me with this. With what? I've been so busy managing the company that I haven't had time to handle personal things. I'm glad you came to me. Thank you. I handed him the divorce papers. I had already signed them. Wait, what? You never mentioned this before. Right, I'm telling you now. Why? Think long and hard about that, you hypocrite. My name is Lily, my husband Mark, and I have been married for 18 years. We have a 16-year-old son and a 14-year-old daughter. After finishing college, I joined Mark's grandfather's company, where I still work. Mark's father, Richard, and Mark were expected to take over the business one day. I always thought we had a good marriage. Our kids are kind, and we live with Mark's family. Everything seemed fine until things changed. One day, Mark's grandfather, Henry, fell and broke his leg. He was over 90 years old but still running the company. After his accident, the family's true colors started to show. Henry was a strict man. When I first joined the family, he often corrected me. Don't put your elbows on the table while eating. Finish chewing before you take a sip of your drink. Turn off your phone. No unnecessary noise at the table. Whenever we ate out, he had even more rules. Take your coat off when you enter a restaurant. Hand it to the hostess. Never bring it to the table. At first, I thought he was just being overly picky, but over time, I realized he was teaching me good manners. He never explained why. He just stated things plainly. But I saw the value in what he said. And he wasn't just strict with me. He also taught my kids proper etiquette, though he was always gentle with them. Even when they forgot the rules, he never yelled. He just kept guiding them. But after he broke his leg, everything changed. The whole family had to take turns caring for him. That's when my in-laws, Mark's brother, and even Mark himself started complaining. This isn't how things were supposed to be. My mother-in-law, Susan, grumbled after checking on Henry. What's wrong? I asked. Everything, she snapped. Why do I have to deal with this? It's exhausting. I wish he would just drop dead. I was shocked. Susan had always seemed cheerful. I couldn't believe she would say something like that. Have you heard about that fortune teller in town? She continued. Yeah. Maybe I should go see her and ask for a little help. She laughed. Oh, I'm just joking, but seriously, looking after him is such a waste of my time. It was a horrible joke, but what stunned me even more was Mark laughing along with her. He didn't even try to stop her. That night, when we were alone, I confronted him. Don't say things like that. Huh? What are you talking about? About Henry. Did I say something wrong? You laughed when your mom joked about him dying. Oh, that? It was just a joke. Relax. It's not funny. It's awful. If it helps my mom blow off steam, what's the harm? No matter what I said, he didn't care. Fine. At least don't joke about it in front of the kids. It's not that serious. It is to me. He's your grandfather. He's done so much for you, and you treat him like this. He's just an old man. He's practically gone already. That wasn't true. Henry had done so much for this family, and they were ready to throw him away. There was no point in arguing with Mark anymore. Just don't say things like that in front of the kids. Fine, you're starting to sound just like him now. Thankfully, Susan and Richard didn't complain about Henry when the kids were around. But a few days later, believe it or not, Susan took Mark and his brother to see the so-called voodoo lady. When they got home, they looked thrilled. I feel so much better. I wasn't sure at first, but asking for help was the right call. Same here. Wouldn't it be hilarious if he actually dropped dead? Did you guys notice all those creepy decorations in her place? They were laughing and acting like they had just done something amazing, completely unaware of how ridiculous they sounded. In reality, the voodoo lady wasn't even Jamaican. Her grandparents were from Fiji, and she was a third-generation American. Plus, she didn't even practice black magic. She focused on spiritual healing instead. I had no idea how they convinced themselves she was some kind of mystical figure. But honestly, I just hoped she had sent some healing energy toward Henry. Meanwhile, the three idiots in front of me were too clueless to realize any of this. After about a month of taking care of Henry, Susan started saying strange things. Listen, guys, Henry's losing it. He just ate dinner, and now he's asking for food again. He keeps saying, "Where's my dinner?" over and over. I didn't believe her. He seemed completely normal whenever I was with him, but Richard and the other men in the family jumped in. Actually, I don't think he even knows who I am. The other day, he asked me who I was. Mark and his brother joined in. Really? You two? Yeah, he acts the same way with me. Maybe he's losing his mind. No way. That doesn't sound right. I told you, when old people get injured, they decline fast. We need a family meeting about this. 2 weeks later, Richard gathered everyone, except Henry, into the living room for an announcement. I'm here to tell you all what we decided in the family meeting. His words hit me hard. I wasn't included in the meeting. That meant they didn't see me as family. I glanced at Mark. He looked completely unbothered. So he didn't think of me as family either. Richard, not caring how I felt, continued. My father isn't well. He's losing his mind. It's dementia. So we decided to move out. Yeah, we don't really have a choice. I was completely shocked. What were they even talking about? So Lily, we're leaving Henry in your care. What do you mean? We need to focus on protecting the company. Don't you get it? It felt like a punch to the gut. I had believed my marriage was strong, that Mark and I had built something meaningful over the years. But it turns out I was wrong. Now it made sense why I wasn't invited to their so-called family meeting. Even after all these years, they never truly saw me as family. What are you saying? Mom works just like you do. And what do you mean you're leaving? Yeah, I don't get it either. Why wasn't Mom included in this meeting? My kids were upset and their voices grew louder. Mark looked uncomfortable. Listen, your mother married into this family. That means she's not a real family member. I couldn't believe my ears. What are you saying to our kids? Please don't say things that will hurt them. I'm just telling the truth. I took a deep breath. I understand. That's enough. Just leave. I'll take care of Henry myself. If that's what you wanted, you should have just agreed from the start. Henry had always been strict, but he had done so much for me. I respected him deeply, no matter how tough he was. He had sacrificed a lot for his family, probably more than he ever did for me. Yet when he needed them the most, they abandoned him without hesitation. I wouldn't let such selfish people take care of him. I knew you would need more than just basic help. He'd need real nursing care in the future, and there was no way I could trust these heartless people to do that. Who knew what they'd do to him? All right, we'll move to the other house. You stay here and take care of Henry. The next day, movers arrived and they packed up their things. They left without hesitation. The only ones who stayed with me were my kids. We'll help too, Mom, my daughter said. Thank you. It's going to be tough from now on. Don't worry, I love my great-grandpa. Yeah, me too, my son added. I smiled at them. Me three, I love him too. Let's all do our best together. Though he can be a little scary sometimes, my son mumbled. What do you mean? Before we could say more, we suddenly heard Henry's voice. Henry, how's your leg? It's fine now, fully healed. 3 months later, Henry and I went to visit the family that had abandoned him. When Susan opened the door, she looked like she had seen a ghost. Is Mark here? Henry asked. Oh, yes. Good. I'd like to speak with him. Henry walked confidently into the living room. Oh my God, you can walk, Mark shouted. What nonsense are you talking about? Dad, do you even know who I am? Richard asked nervously. Henry smirked. Of course, you're the so-called chief sales officer who can't get anything done. Richard turned red. What the hell? And you too, Henry turned to Mark and his brother. You're my foolish grandsons, and you, he pointed at Susan, are my greedy, gold-digging daughter-in-law. Dad, you all abandoned me with Lily, saying I had dementia. That's ridiculous. I know exactly who you people are now. The truth was, Henry had always been sharp. While he did need help after his injury, his mind was just as strong as ever. But once he saw how his family treated him, he decided to put on an act to see their true colors. And they had failed the test. Do you know why I never handed the company over to you guys? He asked. Because you're not capable. If I left it to you, it would collapse in no time. But Mark, Henry added, I do have to thank you. You brought someone into the family who actually deserves to lead. Lily is smart, efficient, and most importantly, has a good heart. That's why I've decided she will be the next CEO. Dad, Wait a second. I was supposed to take over. Mark protested. Henry shook his head. I don't remember ever saying that. You don't understand anything. Why do you think I never retired and gave the company to you or your brother? It's because neither of you has the ability to run it. But Henry, Richard tried to speak. Enough. Don't even try to defend yourselves. You abandoned me, claiming you were protecting the company. But in reality, you just wanted to take the money and live an easy life. You never actually worked to keep the business running. While Henry was gone, Mark, Richard, and his brother had dumped all their responsibilities on the employees, doing nothing but collecting their salaries. Of course, the employees had reported everything to Henry. Don't worry, Henry said. I'm not going to fire you, but Lily will be running the company now. You three will step down from your positions and start over from the bottom. His family protested, but Henry wasn't going to change his mind. 3 days later, I officially became the new CEO. Every employee, except for my in-laws, welcomed the decision and was motivated to work harder. Mark, who had been stripped of his position, came to beg for my attention. He showed up at the house with a large suitcase. But when I arrived, he was standing outside. Hey, what are you doing here? I asked. Thank God, I couldn't get in, he replied, looking uncomfortable. Of course not. I changed the locks. Why? Well, for security reasons. Anyway, are you going on a trip or something? No, I thought you'd be busy, so I came back. I see. Well, I'm super busy. It's rewarding, though. Let me know if I can do anything to help. Thanks, that's nice of you. He seemed relieved I was in a good mood. I unlocked the front door and went inside, but he tried to follow me. I quickly shut the door in his face. Watch it, I warned, stepping outside again. He looked at me with wide eyes. You can help me with this. What's this? I asked, puzzled. I've been too busy as CEO to take care of my things. I'm glad you're here. Thank you. I handed him the divorce papers I had already signed. Wait a minute. You never mentioned divorce before, he said, visibly shaking as he held the papers. Well, I just did. Why? Think long and hard about it, you hypocrite. You left me to care for Henry while you ran away. Do you really think I want to spend my life with someone like you? Are you out of your mind? His hands shook as he stared at the papers. I continued, the moment you left, I knew I wanted a divorce. And the kids agree. They even said it's good riddance. This is the final decision of the family meeting. Family meeting? I'm family too. What's this all about? You can't do this. I wasn't invited to the family meeting, but I'm still family, he stammered. That's what my mom says, so it's decided, I replied coldly. The kids, Henry, and I are unanimous on this. You're not part of our family. Majority rules, I added. Mark tried to argue, but I wasn't listening. Well, send me the divorce papers when you're done. From now on, I'm the CEO, and you're just an employee. Good luck. The divorce took a little over a year, but eventually, Mark and my ex-in-laws resigned from the company. I'm sure their pride was shattered. How did they endure for that long? The environment at the company is so much healthier now, and I quickly realized that they really hadn't been doing their jobs. Nothing has changed except for the improved work atmosphere, which is why I can understand why Henry hadn't retired sooner. A year has passed, and now I live with my kids and Henry. He's as energetic as ever and takes care of himself. Whenever I'm stuck at work, he's always there to help me out. As for my ex-family-in-law, they opened a deli together but failed miserably. I haven't heard from them since, and they're no longer seen in town. I guess things don't work out for people who don't think things through. Meanwhile, I continue to run the company I inherited from Henry, and my life is brighter than ever.
Poor people will rub off on you. Don't even sanitize. Some carry antiseptic for garlic because it's the dry season. It's unclear whether Wendy, my mother-in-law, carries it for that reason or another, but one thing is certain, her actions reek of malice. Mom, let's go home, I said, trying to diffuse the tension. Okay, I understand. Let's go, she replied, her tone distant. On the way home, Mary, my daughter, said something that sent a chill through the air. So, your company's going to go bankrupt? Her words struck like a thunderbolt, her anger cutting through the cool evening breeze. A life marked by love and loss. My name is Sasha James. I turned 55 this year. I don't have a husband. My daughter, Maria, was born 25 years ago, and on that very day, I lost the love of my life. My husband, a company CEO, was always busy but never too busy to love me. He proposed despite my doubts about being a CEO's wife. I thought we could make it work, but fate had other plans. The day Mary was born, my husband rushed to the hospital to see us. He had recently undergone heart bypass surgery, and while it seemed successful, his heart gave out on the way. He never made it back. The delivery room, once filled with the joy of a new life, became a place of mourning. Despite my grief, I had to keep going. For Mary, raising her alone was an exhausting journey. When Mary was young, her preschool teacher reprimanded her for being unkind to a friend. I scolded her harshly, and though she tried to explain, she ended up in tears. Every day was a struggle, but over time, she matured, learning to communicate better. Being a single mother was challenging, and I often faced prejudice. Still, Mary and I made countless precious memories together. A daughter's new chapter. Mary graduated from college and recently turned 25. "Happy birthday, Mary," I said, presenting a homemade cake. "Wow, Mom, you made this? It's amazing." "Thank you," Mary beamed, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes. "This might be our last birthday celebration, just the two of us," I said, glancing at the engagement ring on her finger. "Next year, we'll celebrate with everyone." Mary had come home days earlier, her face glowing as she showed off the silver ring. "David proposed," she announced. Her joy reminded me of my own engagement day. Mary and David had been together since high school, weathering nearly a decade of challenges to reach this point. Watching her smile, I couldn't help but feel bittersweet. "It'll be lonely when she leaves," I muttered, staring at the flickering candle. Unexpectedly, tears welled up and rolled down my cheeks. "Mom, thank you for everything," Mary said, her voice steady. "Even after I get married, I'll always be your daughter." Welcoming David. David came to our home to formally ask for Mary's hand in marriage. "Sasha, thank you for looking after us for 10 years, he said earnestly. "I promise to make Mary happy. Please let me marry her." "What should I do?" I teased, breaking the tension. "Mom, stop," Mary laughed, her cheeks turning pink. We all chuckled, and the sadness of Mary leaving began to lift. Seeing them together, I knew her happiness lay with David. David was already like family. We had taken trips together, and his respect for tradition felt almost unnecessary. Still, I admired his sincerity. "David," I said, "Mary has always struggled with expressing her emotions. Please be patient with her. When things are difficult, talk them through. But if she does something like cheating," I smirked, "bring her to me immediately." Laughter filled the room, echoing in my heart. Meeting Wendy. David's mother, Wendy, ran her own company, which caused repeated delays for the family meeting. "Mom, it's just hard to find a time since she's a CEO," Mary explained. "I understand," I said, though I couldn't shake my unease. After several cancellations, Wendy finally set a date. "Last Saturday of the month. Don't cancel again," Mary insisted, her tone sharper than usual. When the day of the meeting arrived, my uneasiness grew. I dressed in formal attire, anticipating that Wendy might criticize casual clothing. "Mom, you don't have to dress so formally for this," Mary said, trying to reassure me. "I just have a feeling Wendy would find fault if I didn't," I replied. We arrived at the restaurant early, waiting for David and Wendy. When they arrived, Wendy's presence immediately dominated the room. Her aura was polished, sharp, and intimidating. "I'm Wendy, David's mother," she said curtly. Her movements were graceful, her tone commanding, and her gaze cut like a knife. Without waiting for pleasantries, she sighed and led the way inside. "Sorry about my mom," David whispered apologetically. "She's always been like this. Even I find her difficult." "It's okay, David," I said, forcing a smile. "She seems like someone from another world, almost like nobility." At the word nobility, David's expression clouded, but he said nothing. "Mom's already inside. Let's go," Mary urged. The atmosphere felt heavy as I followed them into a private dining room. Wendy was already seated in the place of honor, her posture perfect and deliberate. Every detail of her demeanor seemed calculated to make a statement. "David, sit here, Mary, there, and you, by the door," Wendy instructed, gesturing coldly. It felt like she was subtly assigning me the lowest rank in the room. "I've heard you have back problems," Wendy added with a thin smile. "You'll need to be near the door in case you need the restroom, perhaps even a wheelchair." Her words were dripping with condescension. "Thank you for the consideration," I said with a calm smile. but wouldn't it be better for you to sit by the door? You might need it more. Wendy's face hardened, clearly unused to being addressed in such a manner. No need to worry about me, thank you for your concern, she replied icily, her smile never reaching her eyes. The meal began in stiff silence, broken only by Wendy's smug remarks. Didn't your parents teach you the proper order to eat food? Wendy said, her tone dripping with superiority. You start with soup, then bread, followed by the main dish, and finally the side dishes. It's common sense, and basic manners. She proceeded to lecture us on the importance of this peculiar dining sequence, explaining that soup stimulates digestion. David smiled awkwardly, clearly accustomed to these rigid rules. But this wasn't how I had raised Mary. I had only taught her the basics: don't chew loudly, don't talk with your mouth full, and never walk around during meals. Wendy's elaborate etiquette seemed more suited for a royal banquet than everyday life. When Mary reached for the main dish first, Wendy's eyes flashed with disapproval. What Wendy is saying might be correct, I said, breaking the tense silence, but isn't the heart of manners about consideration for others? Criticizing someone's lack of manners is, in itself, poor manners. Wendy's face flushed with anger, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Talking to someone so uncultured is exhausting, she snapped. David, you should reconsider this marriage. Mary's mother is too crude for our family. Turning to Mary, she added, perhaps you should cut ties with this woman and learn proper manners if you want to be our daughter-in-law. David pleaded with her to stop, but she ignored him, her tirade building. Then, without warning, Wendy pulled a bottle from her bag and dumped its contents over my head. The stinging smell of alcohol filled the air. Poor people rub off on you, she said with a smirk. You need to be sanitized. Shock froze me in place as the liquid dripped from my hair. Mom, let's go, Mary said, her voice trembling with restrained anger. Yes, I said, rising slowly, trying to maintain my composure. David stood frozen, his face pale with disbelief. Mary took my hand and glared at Wendy, who simply smirked in return. I'm sorry, David, Mary said coldly, but don't apologize for her. She may think she's from a higher class, but soon enough, your company will go bankrupt. Wendy's smirk faltered as Mary's words cut through the tension like ice. Mary didn't wait for a response. She wiped the liquid from my clothes and led me out. We never returned to see Wendy again. David's apology. Days later, David arrived at our home, looking pale and exhausted. I should have apologized sooner, he said, his voice trembling, but I've been trying to convince my mother to admit she was wrong. She won't listen, so I came to apologize on my own. His shoulders sagged under the weight of his words. Though David wasn't my son, he had been part of our lives for 10 years, and it hurt to see him in such distress. Come inside, David, I said gently. Let's have some tea. You've been through a lot, are you okay? He hesitated before answering, as if gathering the courage to share what was on his mind. To be honest, I've always hated my mom, he confessed. She's always demanded repayment for raising me, always pressuring me to meet her expectations. I could imagine his situation all too well. I was told from a young age that I was the heir, that I had to follow the family's plan, but in high school, I rebelled. She wanted me to attend a prestigious private school, but I chose a public school with a baseball team instead. His face softened at the memory. That's where I met Mary, he said, his voice steadying. She was the team manager. I fell in love with her, and no matter what my mother says, I want to marry her. Please let me marry her. David trembled as he knelt on the floor, tears glistening in his eyes. David, look up, I said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. This isn't about me, it's about you and Mary. Over these 10 years, I've seen how deeply you care for her. If you love her that much, you don't need my permission, you already have my blessing. Tears streamed down David's face as relief washed over him. I trusted David with Mary's happiness. Slowly, he lifted his head, tears streaming down his face. The weight of his mother's actions must have terrified him, making him fear that everything he cherished might be lost. Yet, those tears revealed just how deeply he cared for Mary. David, I said softly, if you truly want to make Mary happy, you need to break free from your past. I understand, he replied, his voice trembling. This is about my mother, isn't it? I nodded silently. I'm tired of living in fear of her, he admitted, his voice growing steadier. My father, who's still in the hospital, was the only one who ever understood me. He once told me that my mother could never see beyond her own ambitions. For his sake, I've made up my mind. I met his gaze firmly. I'll support you and marry, David, but it's up to you to take the next step. I understand, he said resolutely. I'll do it. The day finally came. Wendy arrived at the restaurant with a sour expression, clearly displeased. What is this cheap place? She asked, her voice filled with disdain as she scanned the humble family restaurant. It was a setting far removed from the elegance she was accustomed to. These are the papers for the adoption, I said, sliding the documents across the table. Adoption? She repeated, her confusion evident. Yes, David is officially joining our family. This is outrageous, Wendy shouted, rising from her seat and slamming the table. He's my only son, how dare you try to take him from me? Her anger quickly turned to venom as she glared at Mary. This marriage is a joke. Mary isn't worthy of David. We are of a different class. We help people like you, not the other way around. Wendy's words grew more unhinged, but I remained calm. Why are you so obsessed with social status, Wendy? I asked. I work with many wealthy clients, but those truly born into wealth don't act like you. Only those who've recently come into money seem this insecure. Wendy's composure faltered, her hands trembling. Don't compare me to those people, she hissed. I was born into wealth. Your actions say otherwise. What are you so afraid of? At the word afraid, Wendy froze. David told me you grew up being told you weren't good enough, because you were a girl, I continued. Her lips trembled. So what? I was born a girl in a family where only men mattered. I had to marry an older man just to preserve my family's status. The bitterness in her voice was palpable, and the truth of her obsession finally came to light. That's why you're so fixated on David being the heir, but if he marries Mary, your family's perfect lineage will be mixed with a... Shut up, Wendy shouted, cutting me off. Enough. The room fell silent as David's father, Brian, entered, pushed in a wheelchair by his son. Though still recovering, he had received special permission to leave the hospital for this meeting. Wendy's face turned ashen. No, you misunderstood, she stammered, her voice unsteady. I never thought marrying you was humiliating. You were just what? Brian interrupted with a weary sigh. Dad says he's divorcing you, Mom, David said, his voice firm. Divorce? Wendy's voice broke. No, please, say something, Brian. But Brian remained silent, refusing even to look at her. Sorry to interrupt, Mary said, her voice calm yet cutting, but we've finalized all the necessary paperwork. Wendy flinched at Mary's words, visibly nervous. Oh, and by the way, Mary added, I own a significant amount of stock in your company. Wendy's eyes widened. What? That's impossible. Actually, it's true, Mary continued. I've held a substantial amount of shares in your company for quite some time. Realization dawned on Wendy's face as she pieced the truth together. Wait, were you that anonymous investor? That's right, Mary said with a small smile. But how? How could a poor family like yours invest that much? Wendy demanded, her voice rising with disbelief. I've been running my late husband's company ever since he passed away, I said calmly, and Mary has helped me manage it. We decided to sell all the shares we hold in your company. Wendy's face turned ghostly pale. No, please don't do that. If you sell now, the company will collapse under its debt. And after you're out of the picture, I'll buy back the shares, David interjected. You've been embezzling money from the company, haven't you, Mom? No, that's not true, Wendy protested, her voice shrill. I was just borrowing a little. I plan to pay it back. Even if you're the owner, you can't use company funds for personal reasons, David said coldly. You could face criminal charges. Wendy was at a loss, unable to defend herself. I've looked into everything, Mom. You've been dealing with shady loan sharks, haven't you? Tears streamed down Wendy's face. I didn't have a choice. I'll pay them back, just don't sell the shares. It's too late for that, David said firmly. From now on, you're no longer the head of the company. Please don't do this. I'll lose everything, Wendy pleaded desperately. David's face remained impassive. Mom, you've always seen me as a tool, not as your son. No, that's not true. I love you, David. If that's true, then tell me, what's my favorite food? Wendy fell silent, unable to answer. See, David said quietly, you don't even know. I'm just a tool to you. Now you'll have to fend for yourself. After David severed ties with her, Wendy's life spiraled out of control. Shunned by her family, she was left to face the consequences of her actions. David quickly removed her from her position as head of the company and appointed a new CEO. Wendy was sued for embezzlement and faced both criminal and civil charges. Desperate to escape her debts and legal troubles, she fled town, only to be arrested for theft. She was sentenced to prison, where she served her time alone. Not a single family member visited her. Meanwhile, David and Mary quietly began their new life together. They held a small, private wedding with close family in attendance. One day, Mary invited me to a baseball game, just like old times. On the way home, she handed me a black and white photograph. "Mom," she said with a smile, "you're going to be a grandmother. I haven't told David yet. I wanted you to be the first to know." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at the picture. "I'm so happy we could go to the game together," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Next time, let's bring the whole family." Mary nodded. From a distance, I watched my daughter, her husband, and my newborn grandchild. What seemed like an ordinary day was, for us, a moment filled with joy and meaning. When my relatives saw the beautifully arranged quality meat courses delivered, they all exclaimed, "Wow, that looks delicious. This is so fancy." But in front of me, there was only a solitary cup of tea. My mother-in-law peeked out from behind the door, grinning in a sly, almost childish way. How typical, I thought. Even today, she couldn't resist trying to torment me. I blurted out, "It's been so long since the family got together. Delicious food should be enjoyed by everyone in the family, right?" But her food grudges were legendary, and I decided it was time to teach her a lesson. "My name is Sarah, I'm 35 years old, and I work in an office. I live with my husband, Jake, who is the youngest of 3 brothers. Jake is kind, easygoing, and we've been married for 5 years. We don't have kids yet, but I've recently started trying to get pregnant. Every time I see my mother-in-law, she pesters me with, 'Still no grandkids?' I've been carefully watching my sleep, nutrition, and timing. But there's one thing holding me back. I'll likely need her help if I have a child." She's almost 66, divorced, and living alone, but she's still active and works part-time. Despite that, it's clear she despises me. To her, I'm the woman who stole her precious youngest son. Once, when Jake and I visited her, he stepped away to use the bathroom. The moment he left, she shot me a sharp look and said, "Sarah, hasn't Jake gained weight?" I shook my head. "I don't think so." "Oh. He definitely has. It's your duty to keep your husband healthy. If he gains weight, he'll get sick." "What are you feeding him? Greasy junk food?" I was dumbfounded. I try to prepare balanced meals. And besides, I can't control what Jake eats at work or when he's out with friends. Maybe it would be more effective to mention this to him directly, I said, trying to stay calm. "What? That would hurt his feelings. It's your job to look after him." I sighed inwardly. Do I really have to babysit a grown man? When Jake returned, I asked him outright, "Honey, have you gained weight recently?" "Huh? No, actually, I've lost a little," he said. The air froze. My mother-in-law's face turned pale as she snapped, "Lost weight? Sarah, are you starving him?" She suddenly flipped her accusation, claiming I wasn't feeding him enough. Jake looked bewildered. "Mom, that's not true. Everything's fine." But she was relentless. "If people start gossiping that you're a terrible wife because Jake looks too skinny, it'll be your fault." Sarah. I was speechless. Whether Jake gains or loses weight, I'm the one getting blamed. The tea-only dinners, visiting her house for dinner, is no better. She insists we come over often, so we do, mostly out of politeness. She serves beautifully plated seasonal dishes, fresh raw fish, seasonal vegetables, warm corn soup, and fried rice. Everyone is served, except me. All I get is a cup of tea. Once, I tried to clarify. I didn't say I wasn't hungry." "Oh, but you said you didn't want anything, didn't you?" she said, feigning innocence. "I didn't say that." "Well, sorry, I must have misunderstood. You know, I'm just an old lady." At first, I believed her, but the pattern repeated every time. She'd apologize with her classic line, "I'm just a forgetful old woman," leaving me unable to call her out without looking petty. Finally, I had enough. After being served only tea for the 3rd time, I stood up. "Let me help you, Mom," I said, heading to the kitchen. I served myself some rice and soup and then sat down, grabbing a few side dishes from Jake's plate. She frowned. Sarah, I told you to stay out of the kitchen, and now you're taking your husband's food? I smiled sweetly. Your cooking is just so delicious. I couldn't resist. Jake looked uncomfortable, but finally spoke up. Come on, Mom, this isn't like you. There's no reason to give Sarah a hard time. Oh, no, it's not like that, she stammered. It was just an old habit. I must have miscounted. Her excuse was weak, and I was now sure her actions were deliberate. Turning the tables, the next time we visited, she prepared chicken and eggs for the main course, foods I couldn't eat because of allergies. When I stared at my cup of tea, wondering what to do, Jake stepped in. Mom, you remember Sarah can't eat chicken and eggs, right? Did you make something else for her? Caught off guard, she stammered. Oh, of course, I thought I'd order takeout for her. Sarah, pick whatever you'd like. I smiled. Thank you, I'll have fries. Her face twitched, but she couldn't back out. When the fries arrived late, I savored them, ignoring her displeasure. Small victories like these remind me to stay resilient. One day, I'll do more than just hold my ground. I'll teach her that respect goes both ways. I slightly regretted ordering fries. I knew my mother-in-law wouldn't let it slide and would probably make some snide comment like, fries are for children. I also decided not to mention that I could eat eggs as long as they weren't raw. There was no point in giving her ammunition. The petty battle between us continued. Once, I proudly brought over some homemade dishes under the guise of sharing. I prepared seasoned rice and simmered vegetables, packing them neatly in a container. I thought, if there's no meal for me, at least I can eat this. But my mother-in-law was one step ahead. Why did you bring something so dirty? She asked, frowning in exaggerated disgust. Dirty? I was taken aback. The rice and vegetables, everything's brown. You should think about presentation, she sneered, sounding like a self-proclaimed aristocrat. But it's delicious, I countered. I came up with the recipe myself. You really have no taste, she said bluntly, so careless and no sense of refinement at all. For some reason, this time she didn't hold back and insulted me outright. Then, as if to add insult to injury, she picked up my container and dumped its contents into the trash. It had gone bad, she said with a dismissive wave. My anger boiled over. That's not possible. At that moment, Jake walked in. What's going on? Why are you shouting? My mother-in-law's fierce expression instantly morphed into a sweet smile. Oh, Sarah's cooking had gone bad, so I threw it out. Jake frowned. That's too bad, it's usually so tasty. Tasty? That brown food? She muttered under her breath. I was livid. Wasting food is something I simply cannot forgive. That day, as usual, I had only tea. I drank it down defiantly while my mother-in-law smirked, clearly enjoying my frustration. A festive family gathering. A week later, we all gathered for my niece's birthday. Jake's 3 brothers, their families, and several relatives we hadn't seen since our wedding were there. The atmosphere was lively, with laughter and chatter filling the air. The tables were pushed together in the recreation room, creating a long banquet setup. My mother-in-law spared no expense for the occasion. The table was lavishly set with appetizers, soup, salad, steak, mashed potatoes, and desserts, all restaurant-quality dishes. Everyone marveled at the spread, exclaiming, "Wow, this looks amazing, and so luxurious." Pleased with the praise, my mother-in-law said, I indulged, because it's been so long since the whole family got together. Let's enjoy these delicious dishes together. But at my seat, as always, there was only tea. My mother-in-law peeked out from behind a sliding door, smirking at me. Even on such a joyous occasion, she found a way to torment me. I felt conflicted. If I pointed out the lack of food at my place, the relatives, unaware of her antics, might offer to share their dishes, which would only give her an excuse to say, "Oh, I must have forgotten, silly me," and then, she'd likely whisper behind my back, "Sarah's so greedy." As I sipped my tea, anger bubbled inside me. I wanted her to admit her pettiness and apologize. Instead, she continued smirking, relishing my discomfort. Finally, I stood up. "Thank you for the meal. It seems I'm not considered family, so I'll be leaving now. Please, everyone, enjoy yourselves." The room fell silent. The relatives exchanged confused glances, whispering to each other. "What's going on? Is something wrong?" someone asked. Feigning innocence, my mother-in-law tilted her head. "Oh my, what's the matter, Sarah?" "There's no meal for me," I said plainly. Her face shifted to mock surprise. "Oh, dear, what should we do? How careless of me." "Come on, what are you talking about? You knew exactly what you were doing." I said, my voice cold. Calmly, she walked over with a tray. Here it is. I just forgot to put it at your seat. No need to make such a fuss, she said with a smug smile. I looked down at the tray, and my stomach sank. It wasn't the steak and sides everyone else had. Instead, it was filled with egg salad, thick omelets, and pudding, all things I couldn't eat due to my egg allergy. My hands trembled. This was deliberate. Jake noticed and stepped in. Mother, this is terrible. You know Sarah's allergic to eggs. Feigning shock, she gasped. Oh my, I didn't order this. Could the restaurant have made a mistake? I was seething but kept my composure. At that moment, my niece peeked at the egg-filled tray and exclaimed, "Can I have some?" The children at the table, not too fond of rare steak, eagerly traded their meat courses for the egg dishes. Now, in front of me was a plate of perfectly cooked steak and sides. Well, then, I said with a smile, picking up my knife and fork, "Thank you for the food." Before I could take a bite, my mother-in-law interjected, "Hold on, you must not know this, so let me teach you. Normally, daughters-in-law only eat the appetizers." Her words echoed through the room. I froze, my knife and fork still in hand. Finally, she had revealed her true colors. Taking advantage of the silence, she snatched the meat courses away from me and scolded, "And you shouldn't give your food to the children. They need to eat everything, including their steaks." Her malicious smile sent chills down my spine. The other daughters-in-law exchanged uneasy glances and began to apologize. "I'm sorry for eating the steak, even though I'm just the daughter-in-law. I'm sorry for drinking the soup, even though I'm just the daughter-in-law. And I'm sorry for eating the mashed potatoes, even though I'm just the daughter-in-law." The sight of them apologizing one after another shook the room. No, that's not what I meant," my mother-in-law stammered. "When I said daughter-in-law, I meant Sarah." The daughters-in-law looked at her coldly. "We're daughters-in-law too. Does that mean we're not recognized as family either?" My mother-in-law's face flushed as she struggled to explain. I took a deep breath and addressed the room. "Mother always serves me tea, nothing else, every single time we visit. It's because I'm not considered part of the family, but treating me like this, knowing I have an egg allergy, that's too much." The relatives began murmuring in disapproval. My mother-in-law's carefully crafted image started to crumble as she tried, and failed, to come up with an excuse. "Oh, I completely forgot about your allergy, Sarah. I could have sworn you liked eggs, but maybe I was mistaken," my mother-in-law stammered, her tone full of false innocence. "But you just said you didn't order this, didn't you?" I replied sharply, my frustration bubbling over. "Did I say that? Did I really?" she mumbled, her web of lies beginning to unravel. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You've always been like this." My husband, Jake, interjected, his voice cold and steady. The accusation made her visibly pale. "Stop it, Mom, this isn't right," Jake continued, his disappointment evident. "It's not like that at all," she cried, desperately trying to deny her actions. But it was too late. The truth hung heavy in the room. "So, you never really considered Sarah part of the family," Jake said, his voice, though calm, carried a weight that silenced everyone. "Then I guess I'm not family either. Sorry for thinking I was all this time." Her face crumpled as her sons exchanged incredulous glances. Jake's brothers chimed in. "Mom, what's going on? Are you harassing Sarah like this?" one of them asked. "No, it's just Sarah," she blurted out, a slip of the tongue that exposed her true intentions. Her panic was palpable. The relatives, sensing the shift in tone, began finishing their meals and quietly leaving the table. The daughters-in-law, one by one, placed money on the table as if signaling their resignation from the farce. My mother-in-law's demeanor crumbled further. I didn't mean for it to come out that way," she stammered, her voice trembling, "but the damage was done." The egg courses sat untouched before me, their presence a silent reminder of her petty cruelty. I glanced at them, then at Jake, who gave me a small nod. I picked up my fork. "This is delicious," I declared after taking a bite. "The aroma of the omelet is irresistible." My voice was light, but my words carried weight. "Sarah, stop eating that," my mother-in-law shrieked, trying to snatch the plate away. Jake grabbed her arm, his voice firm. "Mom, you need to apologize for everything. If it wasn't Sarah, it could have been someone else, and they might not have stayed as strong." Her bitterness twisted her face, and she finally snapped. "Yes, I knew about her allergy. I didn't like her. She took my last son away from me." The room fell silent, her confession echoing loudly. "I wasn't ready to let him go," she continued, her voice cracking. I wanted him to stay here, with me, where I could take care of him. Jake's expression darkened. Mom, I'm 40 years old. What did you expect? For me to live here until I was 50? 60? Her protest was feeble, and any sympathy she might have garnered evaporated. The conversation was interrupted by a cheerful voice at the door. It was the delivery man, here to collect the trays. Oh, I didn't realize this was your house, he said to me, surprised. I thought it was just another delivery. I smiled politely. It's my in-laws' house, but I recognized your restaurant's dishes right away from the taste. I've been a frequent customer. My mother-in-law's confusion grew as she listened. Wait, what do you mean? She asked, her voice faltering. I said, meeting her gaze. I've been stopping by his restaurant because you never prepare food for me. The delivery man, oblivious to the tension, chuckled. Oh, so this is the famous mother-in-law I've heard about, the one who forgets her daughter-in-law's meals. Her face turned ashen. That's enough, she snapped, trying to shut the door on him, but the damage was already done. Jake sighed, looking at her with a mix of disappointment and resolve. Mom, you've always wanted us to come over, but I think it's best if we don't visit anymore. Don't say that, she cried, her voice desperate. Just come, even if it's only you. Jake shook his head. No, Mom, my wife is my family, and if she's not welcome, neither am I. Her protests faded into silence as we left the house together. From that day forward, Jake's brothers and their wives also began to distance themselves. It turned out they'd been mistreated in similar ways, but had remained silent out of fear or resignation. Despite her attempts to contact Jake secretly, he stood firm. Mom, I don't need your cooking anymore, and I won't be coming back for a while, he told her. Over time, the bonds between her and her family frayed, her actions leaving her isolated. Meanwhile, Jake and I looked forward to a brighter, happier chapter, one built on mutual respect, love, and, of course, delicious meals shared as a family.
In a heartbeat, my world was shattered when my husband's voice, cold and harsh, blared through the phone. Why do you always fall apart when I need you? He scolded, seemingly blind to the urgency that had sent me rushing to the hospital, with our unborn child's safety hanging in the balance. We're starving here, waiting for your awful cooking, while you're off lounging in the hospital, he went on, his tone completely devoid of empathy. He announced he'd had enough and was going out to eat with his parents, leaving me to find my own way home. His frustration pierced through the phone, blaming me for a crisis I had no control over, and only deepening my fear and worry for our unborn child, whom I was desperately trying to protect. I was once a dedicated cosmetic salesperson, known for my passion and commitment, with a collection of awards and a stellar reputation to prove it. My job fueled my confidence and was a source of immense pride. Meeting my husband felt like a fairy tale come true, leading to a whirlwind romance and marriage. However, the joy of discovering I was pregnant brought a difficult decision, leaving my job to reduce the risk of miscarriage, a choice I made for the sake of our family's future. As I faced the challenges of pregnancy, my husband's support began to dwindle. What had started as shared excitement soon turned into frustration. Simple tasks that once seemed easy now felt monumental, and my efforts to meet his expectations often fell short. "Where's my lunch?" he would ask, only to dismiss the simple sandwiches I managed to make, criticizing my sensitivity to smells. His words were cutting. Pregnancy is not an illness, belittling my struggles and leaving me to fend for myself. This change in his behavior was a stark contrast to the man I had fallen in love with. His presence at doctor's appointments dwindled, and his empathy for the household chores, which now felt overwhelming to me, seemed to vanish. Our home, once a sanctuary of mutual respect and love, was increasingly feeling like a battleground. I was left trying to protect not only my own well-being but also the health of our unborn child, desperately hoping that we might find our way back to understanding and support. Maybe he's just worn out, I told myself. He had recently taken on a mentorship role for a new colleague, which had been quite demanding. This could be why he seemed more impatient and irritable with me lately. I reassured myself that once our baby arrived, his busy schedule would settle, and we'd find our groove as a family. "It's going to be all right," I murmured, gently stroking my growing belly. clinging to hope despite the challenges of my changing body and the strain in our relationship. Unfortunately, things between my husband and me haven't improved. To make matters worse, my in-laws have begun dropping by unannounced, heightening my stress levels. They've scrutinized the cleanliness of our home and voiced concerns about how we'd cope once the baby arrived. Despite their criticisms, they expected immediate hospitality and demanded I whip up something for them on the spot. Caught off guard and unprepared, I felt overwhelmed and judged for not being a better host. Each visit ended with their disappointment, and my husband consistently sided with them, never defending me. Despite my best efforts, I felt perpetually inadequate in their eyes. During one of these visits, I was sent out to buy groceries despite being heavily pregnant. The strain proved too much, and I collapsed. When I woke up in the hospital, I learned that I had fainted from overexertion, but thankfully, our baby was still safe. The doctors advised a few days of rest in the hospital. I saw missed calls from my husband on my phone and realized he must have been worried when I didn't return from the store. However, when I finally called him back, hoping to hear concern or relief in his voice, I was met with anger. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his tone harsh and unforgiving, as if my health and our baby's safety were insignificant. His words left me shivering, feeling both hurt and abandoned. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to explain. "I collapsed at the grocery store and was taken to the hospital. They have me on IV fluids and want me to stay here for a few days for observation." But his response was cold and dismissive, as if my well-being was secondary to his own inconvenience. "You collapse, and I'm supposed to care. Why don't you answer my calls? You're so slow." His harsh words stung, and I dreaded the thought of our unborn child being exposed to such negativity. "Please stop yelling. It's not good for the baby," I pleaded, but my request for compassion fell on deaf ears. He remained unrelenting, indifferent to my plea for kindness. "We're starving here, waiting for your terrible cooking, and you're just lounging in the hospital," he said, his voice dripping with anger and lacking any trace of concern. His clear intention to go out with his parents and leave me to manage on my own, despite my condition, was crushing. His harsh words made me flinch, and not wanting to expose my baby to any more negativity, I ended the call, feeling profoundly alone and disheartened. As I returned to my hospital room, tears began to flow uncontrollably. In that vulnerable moment, a comforting voice reached out to me. "Are you okay?" I looked up to see Helen, a customer I had grown close to during my time as a cosmetic salesperson, offering me a towel. Recognizing her immediately, a wave of relief and warmth washed over me. "Helen, is it really you? I'm so glad you remember me," she said with a warm smile. Our unexpected reunion felt like a twist of fate, a much-needed reminder of kindness and human connection during my darkest hour. Helen had been more than just a customer. After a painful divorce, she had lost her self-confidence and stopped wearing makeup altogether. I vividly recalled the day I approached her at the cosmetics counter, offering to help her try some new products. The transformation in her appearance was more than just physical. It marked a moment of emotional healing and a step towards regaining her self-esteem. Over time, Helen became more than a client. She became a friend. But 5 years before I left my job, she had suddenly stopped coming, and I had always wondered what had happened to her. Now, here she was, a beacon of support at a time when I needed it most. "I had come back hoping to reconnect with you, Helen," she said, her voice tinged with surprise and disappointment. "When I visited your old workplace, I was taken aback to learn that you had left." "I'm sorry for dropping in so unexpectedly," Helen explained with a chuckle. "I've been working abroad, running a business, and it's been incredibly busy. It's been ages since I've had the chance to enjoy America and its cuisine, so I decided to come back once things calmed down a bit. And of course, right after I tried to find you, I ended up here with appendicitis." Her laughter brought a sense of lightness to the situation despite the circumstances. "It's only in the early stages, so medication should sort it out. And honestly, if this had happened while I was still abroad, the treatment costs would have been sky high. In a way, I'm relieved it happened here," Helen continued, her optimism and familiar smile proving as infectious as ever. This unexpected reunion lifted my spirits, and we began to joyfully reminisce about the past. As our conversation grew more heartfelt, Helen, with her ever-kind smile, gently inquired, "You don't have to share if you're not comfortable, but I noticed you seemed upset earlier. Is everything all right?" Feeling a deep trust in Helen, Not just as a former customer, but as a true friend, I felt compelled to open up. I opened up to Helen about the difficulties I was facing with my husband and in-laws. I'm really concerned about bringing my child into this environment, I admitted. I'm afraid they'll face the same treatment I do. And now, without my job, the thought of living independently, especially with a child, feels overwhelming. To my surprise, Helen made an incredibly generous offer. I actually have an apartment that you could use. I manage a few properties as part of a project I developed on some inherited land. It's a cozy 2-bedroom with a separate bathroom, soundproof walls, and it's in a safe neighborhood close to supermarkets and a police station. There's no need for a deposit at the moment, and you can start paying rent whenever you're ready. It's a really good deal. What do you think? Helen's enthusiasm was unmistakable, and her offer was so genuine it made me laugh in disbelief. Are you sure you can offer it at such favorable terms? I asked, deeply moved by her kindness. Absolutely, Helen replied with a warm smile. I trust you to take great care of the place, and I think it's crucial to support each other during tough times. You're more than welcome to stay there, she assured me, her generosity evident. Helen's unexpected kindness was a beacon of hope, providing not just a place to stay but a chance for a fresh start. Eager to support someone she valued, Helen offered her apartment, an act of generosity I couldn't turn down. With heartfelt gratitude, I accepted her offer. Days later, after receiving the doctor's approval, I left the hospital and moved straight into the apartment Helen had prepared for me. Her remarkable generosity was evident in how effortlessly she had arranged everything over the phone. I didn't go back to the home I had shared with my husband. Instead, I embraced this fresh start in Helen's warm and cozy apartment. Despite feeling guilty for not paying rent immediately, Helen reassured me with a laugh, insisting there was no rush. While my husband was at work, I quietly returned to our old home to gather my belongings, only to realize how little there truly felt like mine. The house seemed as empty as the ache in my heart within its walls. Helen's support extended beyond the apartment. She introduced me to a lawyer who had previously assisted her, reinforcing my decision to pursue a divorce. The lawyer's encouragement became a beacon of hope, and as each hospital visit confirmed the health of my growing baby, my resolve only grew stronger. During one such visit, as I stepped outside, my heart sank when I saw my husband waiting for me. Panic surged through me, and despite my best efforts to flee, my pregnancy slowed me down. He confronted me about the lawyer and our new living situation, gripping my arm tightly. I stood my ground, insisting that any discussions about the divorce, compensation, or child support be handled through the lawyer. His demands for me to return and his refusal to provide support were met with my firm refusal. As my husband tried to drag me back, a young woman intervened. Her name was Rebecca, and she was clearly familiar with my husband. Stepping in front of me with a protective stance, Rebecca's presence shifted the dynamic of the confrontation. The tension between her and my husband was palpable, but Rebecca stood firm, refusing to let him take me against my will. Her resolve, coupled with the implied threat of calling the police, gave me a glimmer of hope and the courage to assert myself in the face of this unexpected conflict. When my husband heard the mention of the police, he looked alarmed and quickly left. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief that made my legs go weak. Rebecca quickly moved to my side, offering support. "Are you okay?" she asked gently as I apologized, expressing how grateful I was for her help. Without hesitation, Rebecca called a taxi for me, insisting on ensuring I got home safely. Despite feeling guilty for causing her trouble, she reassured me it was no bother. When I shared my address, Rebecca was surprised to discover that I lived just below her. It was a happy coincidence that we were neighbors. Rebecca, with her cheerful and caring demeanor, turned out to be a new employee at my husband George's workplace. She had reported George's inappropriate behavior, which led to his removal as her mentor. George was notorious for his lack of empathy towards female employees, often making insensitive remarks about personal matters like menstruation and marriage. Rebecca's experiences echoed my own, highlighting the troubling behavior I had endured from him during my pregnancy. 3 weeks after our meeting, Rebecca and I had become good friends, enjoying dinners together and sharing our lives. She informed me that George had been transferred to a subsidiary company following numerous complaints and issues at work. It turned out that Rebecca was the daughter of Helen, the successful businesswoman who managed several properties, including the apartment I was staying in. George had previously boasted about handling Helen's account, but his behavior ultimately led to a reassessment of his professional standing. Helen had advocated for George's transfer after uncovering his misconduct both at work and towards me. Rebecca, resourceful and determined, had tackled workplace issues independently without leaning on her mother's influence. However, upon discovering my connection to Helen, she felt a stronger sense of duty to act. Helen encouraged Rebecca to compile all evidence against George, which contributed to his transfer. With George now facing reduced income and an increased workload, his situation had markedly changed. Helen's advice to me, drawing on her extensive experience, was to remain resolute and not be swayed by any attempts George might make to elicit sympathy. Her guidance was a source of great reassurance, coming from someone with such expertise and understanding. After deciding to divorce George, he attempted to reach out through our lawyer, expressed how challenging work had been and how much he missed me. He even apologized and pleaded for a chance to reconcile, but I remained resolute in my decision to proceed with the divorce. Supported by Helen, George ultimately had no choice but to accept the divorce terms and agree to pay child support and damages over time. My next significant hurdle was dealing with my in-laws, particularly my father-in-law, who was overly eager about the baby being a boy. I could sense trouble brewing, and my concerns were soon validated. One day, as I was about to leave, my father-in-law grabbed my arm. Having followed Rebecca in an attempt to confront her, he instead found me. He demanded that I surrender the baby once born, insisting that the child was the family's heir. Despite my efforts to escape, his grip was firm and unyielding. Just then, a commanding voice cut through the tension, demanding my father-in-law release me. Before I could react, Rebecca executed a precise judo move, sending him sprawling to the ground. It turned out that Rebecca, a top-ranked judoka with national titles, had mastered judo to protect herself and her mother during challenging times. She confronted my father-in-law, condemning him for ignoring George's behavior and trying to interfere in my life. Rebecca firmly defended my right to move forward, making it clear that any interference was unacceptable. As the sound of approaching sirens grew louder, I realized Rebecca had called for help before stepping in to rescue me. My mother-in-law, who had been waiting nearby in the car, observed silently as the police arrived and took both her and my father-in-law into custody. In the aftermath, my father-in-law was arrested, and after some reflection, my mother-in-law chose to divorce him. She decided to start anew, moving back to the countryside to live a life free from external pressures. Despite George's pleas to accompany her, expressing his frustration with his job and the legal battles, she firmly refused, prioritizing her own fresh start over his desires. Through the lawyer, my mother-in-law reached out to offer her apologies and left a sum of money as a gesture of goodwill. Helen explained that it's not uncommon for people to feel lost after a divorce, and the money was likely her mother-in-law's way of apologizing and supporting my son's future. Although her past behavior had been troubling, I was touched by her effort to make amends and appreciated the support. Following the finalization of the divorce, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. My mother-in-law chose to settle in the countryside, preferring a life of solitude over remaining with George. When my father-in-law was eventually released, he found that the house had been demolished by my mother-in-law before her departure. Left with few options, he moved in with George, which only added to their difficulties and contributed to George's resignation from his job due to his tarnished reputation. Despite the challenges, the child support payments continued to arrive reliably, likely managed by Helen and the lawyer. Rebecca, recognized for her hard work, advanced to a project leader role, earning admiration from her colleagues. Helen's ventures, including women-only properties and housing for foreigners, were thriving. As for me, once my son grew a bit older, I planned to return to work. Helen had offered me a position at a new high-end cosmetics store she was opening. Helen remained a steadfast supporter, showering my son with affection as if he were her own grandchild. Rebecca also made time to visit us, her presence a comforting reminder of the strength and kindness that had carried me through the toughest times. Inspired by these remarkable women, I was determined to be equally strong and protective of my son, embracing the support and resilience they had shown me.
I can't believe you brought homemade pudding. My business partner teased me, expecting fancier desserts. He tossed the pudding in the trash, leaving me speechless. Feeling angry and helpless, I went home. My wife seemed oddly cheerful, promising that the rude man would face consequences. The next day, something surprising happened when I went to meet the president. My name is Danny Klein, and I've been working in an office for 10 years now. Today, I'm feeling nervous because I have to bring a gift to a tough business partner named Walter Morris. He's picky about gifts, and if he doesn't like yours, he won't even talk to you properly. Sometimes he'll even make up excuses to send you away. But he's important for our business, so I have to deal with him. One day, my manager came to my desk and praised our company's great patented technology. I agreed, but also mentioned how they'd become arrogant because of it. We used to work together closely, but things have changed. My manager looked at me sympathetically. I chuckled bitterly and ran my hand through my hair. I've heard that the president and his wife are nice people, despite Walter being difficult. I hope things improve soon. Yeah, things should get better soon. It's tough, but it's all part of the job. Thanks, I'll give it my best shot, I replied to my manager. But finding the right gift every time is such a hassle. If I get him the same thing again, he accuses me of being lazy, I complained. My manager suggested, the president's wife really likes pudding. Maybe next time you see them, consider getting some pudding. As soon as my manager mentioned it, I thought of a special pudding from a local store. It was incredibly smooth and creamy, just melting in your mouth. It had the perfect balance of richness and sweetness, exactly like the pudding my wife, Lily, makes. Lily runs a small pastry shop from our home, and her puddings are a hit with everyone in the neighborhood. They're so popular that they often sell out by mid-afternoon, loved by both kids and seniors alike. After work, I hurried home to find Lily already in the kitchen, preparing dinner. As I entered, a sweet aroma filled the air, making me smile. Lily greeted me with a cheerful welcome home, humming a tune as she worked. Excitedly, I told her about my conversation with the boss and how his wife loved pudding. I want to take some as a gift. Can you make some? I asked eagerly. Lily hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you think my pudding will be good enough?" I could see a hint of nervousness behind her smile, but it reassured me. Even though Lily makes amazing puddings, making one as a gift for my business partner's wife was understandably stressful for her. Still, she agreed with a nod and said, "Okay." Once dinner was ready, Lily didn't even sit down to eat. Instead, she jumped straight into preparing the pudding for tomorrow, insisting she needed to get it done. "Thank you, Lily." "I'm sorry," I said, feeling grateful but guilty. "It's no problem. I want more people to taste my pudding," Lily replied cheerfully, diving into the preparations. She moved back and forth between the kitchen and her shop, busy with the task. Seeing her determination, I couldn't just stand there watching. I decided to pitch in and help, following Lily's instructions closely. We ended up staying up later than usual, eagerly anticipating the reaction of the boss and his wife the next day. I fell asleep almost instantly. The next morning, I woke up to find Lily already awake, her head popping out from the shop, wearing a white apron. "It's ready," she announced, holding a tray of neatly wrapped puddings in her hands. "Thank you, Lily," I expressed my gratitude, not knowing how early she must have woken up to prepare everything. I thanked her repeatedly, feeling appreciative of her effort. Lily, looking a bit bashful, responded, "It didn't take too long because you helped me." As I reminisced about the morning's activities, a smile crept onto my face. I carefully placed the puddings, wrapped in white paper bags with blue ribbons, on the passenger seat and let out a sigh. With renewed confidence, I started the company car. There shouldn't be any problem with Lily's pudding. It's sure to impress. That's what I believed, until I heard a voice that crushed my hopes. "What's this?" Just like always. I mentioned Walter's name to the receptionist with a smile, and she asked me to wait for a moment. Taking a seat in the entrance, I made sure the pudding in the bag was safe. As I waited, I noticed Walter approaching from the elevator, wearing a slight smile. When he glanced at what I was holding, he immediately questioned, "What is this?" with doubt in his voice. I couldn't help but flinch. Nevertheless, I replied calmly, "It's just a small gift. It's pudding made by my wife, who runs a pastry shop." But before I could finish, Walter scoffed, "Pudding? Are you mocking me? Shouldn't you bring something fancier?" His words were filled with disdain, and he looked at me as if he were mocking me. At first, I didn't understand. but as it sank in, I felt my fists clenching in anger. Walter was a client I had been working with smoothly until now. I couldn't afford to ruin our relationship, so I swallowed my emotions and tried to reason with him. Even though it's not fancy, my wife's puddings are quite popular, I explained, but Walter dismissed it, saying, "No way. I can't eat pudding made by an amateur." He snatched the bag of pudding from my hand roughly, leaving me stunned. "What are you doing?" I exclaimed, taken aback. My anxious voice clashed with Walter's dry laughter, attracting curious glances from the receptionist and other employees passing by. "I can't believe you give me such low-quality stuff," Walter remarked, lifting the bag to his face with a scrutinizing gaze. My anger surged, but I fought to keep my cool. Then I heard him say, "It's the CEO's wife's favorite. Even so, would you bring something made by an amateur?" I defended, feeling the need to stand up for Lily's skill. "My wife is definitely not an amateur. Even so, you must understand that I can't serve such an unsightly pudding to the president." With that, Walter released his grip on the bag, letting it fall into the trash can nearby. It happened so fast that I couldn't react, leaving me standing there in shock. The bag with the pudding inside made a mournful sound as it landed in the bin. A small gasp escaped from the receptionist nearby. "I'll take care of it for you today. Just be more careful next time," Walter stated, his voice dripping with irritation. All I could do was stare at the discarded pudding and mutter a barely audible, "I'm sorry." Walter nodded in response, his expression unreadable. Whether he was satisfied with my apology, I couldn't tell. "I've got some urgent matters to attend to. I hate to do this, but could you please leave?" Without waiting for my response, he turned and headed towards the elevator. I stood there stunned, unable to tear my gaze away from the discarded pudding. Time seemed to blur, and before I knew it, I found myself back in my company car. The memory of Lily's hard work on the pudding weighed heavily on my heart, filling me with a mix of sadness and anger. Most of all, I felt frustrated with myself for not being able to stand up for her or myself. All because Walter was a business partner. I couldn't focus on work that day, my mind consumed with how to tell Lily about what happened. When I got home, Lily greeted me with a smile, casually sipping tea on the couch. Caught off guard, I paused in untying my tie. "Did something happen?" Lily asked, noticing my hesitation and concern. Unable to hide it any longer, I confessed everything to her. "I'm sorry, he threw away the pudding you worked so hard on right in front of me." Lily looked surprised at first, but then she gently squeezed my hand. "It's not your fault. Maybe there was something wrong with the pudding." Deep down though, I knew that wasn't true. Walter hadn't even bothered to look inside the bag before tossing it away. It didn't matter what was inside. If it wasn't up to his standards, it was going in the trash. Before I could apologize again, Lily stopped me. She seemed to think for a moment, then grinned mischievously. "That man's getting fired." "Fired?" I questioned, taken aback by Lily's comment. "I'm just kidding though," she reassured me with a soft chuckle. Even though it might not have been perfect, it's still disheartening to hear that the pudding I worked so hard on was thrown away. Her reaction was understandable. Anyone would be upset to hear their efforts were disregarded like that, even Lily, who rarely makes such remarks about rude clients. "But who knows, it could happen," she added mysteriously, leaving me feeling a bit puzzled. But that was the end of our conversation. Lily urged me to wash up early that night, so I bathed in a mix of confusion and frustration before turning in earlier than usual. The next day, still feeling weighed down by yesterday's events, I headed to work with a heavy heart. My boss had instructed me the day before. "I know it's not ideal, but tomorrow you need to buy a cake from the high-end Western confectionery store in front of the station." His words echoed in my mind as I stopped by the pastry shop near the station on my way to work and bought a cake. I placed the box from the fancy pastry shop on the passenger seat, letting out a sigh heavier than the day before. Yesterday, I had promised Walter that I'd come back today with an apology gift. Maybe because of the incident, Walter had responded with an even more arrogant tone. "All right, I'm counting on you this time," he said before hanging up. I should get going, I told myself, mustering up some motivation as I settled into the driver's seat of my company car. I drove towards the client's office, determined to make things right. As I entered through the automatic doors, a receptionist who recognized me hurried over. "Are you Mr. Klein from Company X?" she asked. "Yes, that's me, but please, lead the way," I replied, Following her, I stepped into the elevator, and before I knew it, we had arrived at our destination floor. The room I was directed to turned out to be the president's office. The receptionist knocked a few times, and when the door opened, I was ushered in. Inside, I found the president of the client company, his wife, and Walter, all looking uneasy. I had expected Walter to be his usual arrogant self, especially after yesterday's incident, but I was surprised. "Nice to meet you, I'm Danny Klein from Company XX. Thank you for having me here today," I said, puzzled by the situation, as I greeted the president, Mr. Peterson. "You must be Danny. Pleasure to meet you. I'm Mr. Peterson, and this is my wife, Anne," Mr. Peterson replied, cutting the formalities short. They exchanged glances, then called my name and bowed deeply. "We are truly sorry for what happened. Please accept our apologies," Mrs. Peterson added sincerely. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I asked, feeling surprised by how the president's tone suddenly changed. His wife, standing beside him, looked shocked too, bowing her head without saying a word. I quickly asked them to lift their heads, but they wouldn't. Then, I noticed Walter, who was standing behind them, also bowing. This was unusual because Walter was usually very proud and never apologized. But there he was, saying sorry with careful words for the first time. I was taken aback and didn't know what to say. Walter continued, "Actually, yesterday my wife found something in the lobby trash while she was cleaning." His wife nodded to confirm. She seemed upset and asked around about it. "She found out that the pudding you brought earlier had been thrown away disrespectfully by someone. We called him to ask, and at first, he denied it, but later he admitted it reluctantly." Mr. Peterson gave Walter a cold look, and Walter seemed to feel it as he bit his lip and looked away. I didn't know Mrs. Peterson liked pudding. I thought it was from Danny, and I tossed it without thinking. "I'm sorry," Walter said, sounding quieter than usual. I was surprised by Walter's unusual behavior. Mrs. Peterson shook her head firmly. "That's not why I'm upset," she said in an angry tone, breaking her silence. "Danny, I've known about the pudding from Lily's store for a while. I knew it was really popular and always sold out quickly, even though the store was busy. You made the pudding for me. It's disappointing that an employee of a manufacturing company doesn't appreciate the effort put into making a product." I was shocked that Mrs. Peterson knew about Lily's store and understood the emotions behind making something. Walter, looking even more nervous, tried to apologize again, but Mr. Peterson told him to face the person he was apologizing to and lifted his pale face up. "Walter Hooper sincerely apologized to me for carelessly throwing away the handmade gift from your wife yesterday." He faced me directly, bowing his head repeatedly. In that moment, I felt a sense of clarity. When I got home, Lily was sitting on the sofa drinking tea, just like yesterday. Without saying hello, I told her about what had happened today. Lily listened to me without interrupting until I finished. Then she smiled and said, "I thought as much." Her calm demeanor suggested she had expected everything that happened. Lily got up and made a cup of tea for me from the kitchen. As she handed it to me, she began to speak. "Actually, yesterday evening, a man in a suit came to buy our pudding, but we were all out. He mentioned that the wife of his company's CEO loves our pudding. Could it be the president's wife he meant?" "Probably Ann Peterson," Lily said with excitement, nodding happily. "It's amazing to know there are people who appreciate the effort we put into our products. It motivates me to make even better things for them." Lily took a sip of her tea, still smiling. Seeing her so genuinely happy made me understand Mr. and Mrs. Peterson's words better, but it also made me feel guilty. Did I truly value the effort of producers like Lily while doing my job? I was angry at Walter's arrogance, but was it because I thought we were doing him a favor by selling our products? Maybe I was being carried away too. Like Lily, shouldn't I strive to connect the creator's thoughts with the consumers through my work? As I thought about all of this, Lily noticed something and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "Perhaps from now on, you'll consider both the creators and the users' perspectives." Lily's words made me feel a bit embarrassed, but more importantly, they gave me a new outlook on my job. After everything that happened, Walter's attitude changed a lot. He wasn't as arrogant as before and stopped demanding gifts. Now, we openly share our opinions and have a better relationship. Like Lily, I want to keep delivering the creator's ideas to users through my work.
My name is Rachel Palmer, and I'm 37 years old. Just last week, I attended a professional gala where I was being honored for my work in research and education. It was a night I'd anticipated for weeks, a celebration of everything I'd built over the years, but as fate would have it, the moment I stepped into the restroom to catch my breath, I came face to face with someone I hadn't seen in nearly 15 years, my mother. She was standing at the sink, reapplying her lipstick, every bit the poised socialite I remembered. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she'd recognize me, but then her eyes flicked up to the mirror, locking onto my reflection. Her hand froze mid-motion, and I saw her jaw tighten. "Rachel," she said, her voice cool and detached, as if we'd run into each other at a country club instead of a restroom after 15 years of silence. "I didn't expect to see you here." I steadied myself, gripping the edge of my clutch. "I could say the same," I replied evenly. "What brings you here?" She turned to face me, her posture as rigid as ever. "Your father and I were invited." "Of course, we've always supported organizations focused on education." "And you?" she added, her tone laced with mild curiosity. "I'm being honored tonight," I said, meeting her gaze, "for my work in research." Her expression barely shifted, but I caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes before she masked it. "I see," she said, turning back to the mirror. "Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Her words pulled me back to the day I left that house for the last time. I was 19, and the years leading up to that moment had been anything but easy. In high school, I'd struggled with depression, but in our family, admitting that wasn't an option. "What could you possibly be sad about?" my mother had said when I once tried to confide in her. Her voice was dripping with irritation. "You have everything, more than most kids your age. Stop making excuses." But the truth was, I had been drowning. The pressure to live up to the Palmer name was suffocating. By junior year, my grades were slipping. By senior year, I was barely hanging on. My parents didn't see a teenager in need of help. They saw a failure, an embarrassment. When I only got into a community college, my father's fury was unmatched. "This family has standards," he'd said that night, pacing the living room while I stood clutching my acceptance letter. "And you've done nothing but drag us down. You want to waste your life? Fine, but you'll do it on your own." I was kicked out that night. I can still feel the weight of the duffel bag I carried as I left the house, filled not just with clothes, but the heavy reality of being completely on my own. My parents didn't even say goodbye. My mother remained seated on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if I were invisible. My father disappeared into his study, his ultimatum already delivered. For the first few weeks, I crashed on a friend's pull-out couch while I figured out my next steps. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I worked part-time at a diner to cover tuition and rent, scraping by until I could afford a tiny studio apartment. It was a grind, balancing classes, shifts at the diner, and the relentless voice in my head that whispered I was a failure. But for the first time, I could breathe, even if the air felt thin. That first year was a blur of late-night study sessions and endless shifts, but it also brought something unexpected: hope. I decided to study chemistry, partly because I loved it, and partly because I wanted to prove to myself, and maybe even to them, that I could excel at something difficult. It wasn't easy. My high school grades had been mediocre, and I felt like I was starting from behind. But for the first time in years, I wasn't crushed under their expectations. I could focus on learning. I still remember my first chemistry exam. I had spent weeks preparing, poring over every formula, every reaction, until I could practically recite them in my sleep. When the professor handed back the graded tests, I hesitated, terrified to look, but there it was, a 92%. I nearly cried right there in the classroom. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd earned it. That small victory felt like the first step toward rebuilding myself after everything had fallen apart. Over the years, I evolved in ways I never expected. College wasn't easy, but I learned how to work for what I wanted. The more I gave, the more I grew. By the time I finished my associate's degree, I wasn't just a student anymore. I was someone who had learned how to fight for her place in the world. When I transferred to a 4-year university, the obstacles didn't stop, but I had learned how to face them head-on. The shy, insecure girl who barely scraped by in high school was gone. In her place was someone who could stand in front of a class, explain complex concepts, and hold her own. Chemistry, which had once been a daunting challenge, became my passion. I didn't just want to pass anymore. I wanted to excel, to prove that I wasn't the failure they thought I was. While juggling part-time work, I also interned at local research labs, gaining hands-on experience that eventually led to a life-changing opportunity, becoming a lead researcher at a nonprofit dedicated to advancing science education. It wasn't just a job, it was a mission. I wanted to create a space where other kids, the ones who were told they weren't good enough, could find their way too. Graduating with my bachelor's degree was supposed to be a triumphant moment, but when the day arrived, I realized something painful. My parents hadn't even called, not to congratulate me, not to ask about my plans, nothing. My father, the owner of a massive fertilizer company, had more money than he knew what to do with. He and my mother lived in a mansion, hosted extravagant parties, and rubbed elbows with politicians and CEOs, but for all their wealth, they'd never taken an interest in me unless it was to criticize. Even after I graduated with honors, after working tirelessly to get where I was, I didn't exist in their world. To them, I was a reminder of their failure, an inconvenient blemish on their perfect lives. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that they'd at least acknowledge my hard work, but they didn't. It was as if I had never mattered to them. That realization hit harder than I expected. The only family member who came to my graduation ceremony was Aunt Lydia, my mother's younger sister. Lydia was the black sheep of the family, shunned for being too eccentric, but she'd always been kind to me. She was the one person who remembered my birthday, even when my parents pretended I didn't exist. When I saw her in the crowd, waving excitedly from the back, a lump formed in my throat. After the ceremony, I found her waiting in the parking lot with a huge bouquet of flowers. "You did it, kid," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you." It wasn't much, but it was enough. It wasn't the cold silence I'd grown used to. Aunt Lydia reminded me that family didn't have to mean perfection and that love could come from unexpected places. She didn't care that I hadn't followed the straight path my parents wanted for me. She cared that I'd made it, no matter the hurdles. A few months after graduation, while wrapping up a research project at the university, one of my professors, Dr. Collins, pulled me aside. He was an old-school chemist who spoke about the periodic table like it was poetry. He had noticed my work ethic and persistence. "Rachel," he said, his voice calm and thoughtful, "I've been in touch with some colleagues at Oxford University. They're offering a research opportunity in environmental chemistry, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." At first, I thought he was joking. Oxford? One of the most prestigious universities in the world? Me? But Dr. Collins insisted. "This isn't just a job," he said. "It's a chance to make real contributions to the field. You've earned this. Don't let fear hold you back." His words stayed with me as I filled out the application. I applied hesitantly, not fully believing it could happen. The process was rigorous, and I doubted I'd make the cut. But weeks later, an email arrived. "We are pleased to inform you that you've been awarded a research grant for your proposed work in environmental chemistry at Oxford University." I was stunned. Moving to England felt like stepping into an entirely new world. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my old friends. The only person who knew was Aunt Lydia. A few days before I left for England, I called Aunt Lydia. She was the only person I trusted with the truth. "You've worked too hard to let anything hold you back," she said, her voice steady and encouraging. "Do this for yourself, Rachel." She understood why I needed to disappear, to escape the shadows of my past and carve out a future without the weight of anyone's expectations hanging over me. I asked her not to tell anyone where I was going. I didn't want them to find me, or worse, drag me back into their world of judgment and indifference. So, with nothing but a backpack and a faint hope for a new beginning, I boarded a plane to Oxford. Settling into a tiny flat in the heart of the city, I threw myself into my work. The first few weeks were a blur of adjustment, the language, the culture, the isolation, but as I immersed myself in my research, I began to feel at home. I was part of something bigger now, working on projects that truly mattered, projects with the potential to make a real impact on the world. Chemistry was no longer about proving myself to my parents or anyone else. It was about changing the future. Over time, I completed my master's degree, and the momentum of my research carried me forward, driven by a newfound confidence. I applied for a PhD. The process was grueling, with sleepless nights and endless hours in the lab, but I was determined. I had found my place at Oxford, and I wasn't turning back. Years later, I earned my doctorate, establishing myself as a respected researcher in the field of environmental chemistry. The culmination of my journey felt surreal, especially when I was offered a position as a professor at the University of Cambridge. Cambridge, one of the world's most prestigious institutions. It felt like a dream I had never dared to chase. not because I didn't think I was capable, but because it seemed too far removed from the girl I had once been. At Cambridge, I found a new passion in teaching and mentoring, guiding the next generation of scientists. Sharing the knowledge and resilience I had gained brought me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't anticipated. Standing at the front of a classroom, commanding respect and attention, I often thought of the shy, uncertain girl I had been. That girl had grown into someone I was proud of. Still, a part of me sometimes glanced over my shoulder, wondering if anyone back home knew where I was, or cared enough to find out. My parents had never reached out, not a single call, letter, or email since I left. It was as though I had been erased from their lives. Did they ever think about me? I told myself it didn't matter. I had built my life without them, and their silence only proved how unnecessary their approval had been. But when I saw my mother in that bathroom mirror, the weight of our history came crashing back. Her dismissive words, "Everyone finds their way eventually," rattled in my mind. Did she really believe that? Did she even care about the years I'd spent clawing my way toward the future I had dreamed of? I thought about all the times they'd told me I wasn't good enough, about the cold silence when I left their house, and the years of absence since. It felt like a lifetime ago, but standing there, the bitterness was as sharp as ever. I had worked so hard, leaving everything behind, moving to England, earning my master's and PhD, becoming a professor at Cambridge, and here she was, treating my accomplishments like an afterthought, like they didn't matter, like I didn't matter. When she walked out of the bathroom, poised and distant, I felt a pang of something between anger and release. Watching her disappear back into the crowd, I realized how far I had come. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need their approval. I had built a life on my own terms, and that was enough. The gala began shortly after. The hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses filled the air as I tried to shake off the weight of our encounter. This was my night, the moment I had worked for, fought for. I took a deep breath and stepped into the ballroom, where my name was called. Rachel Palmer, honored for her groundbreaking contributions to education and sustainable chemistry. The applause was deafening as I walked to the stage. The lights bore down on me, illuminating the sea of well-dressed guests. As I stood there, the gravity of the moment hit me. This wasn't just about my work, it was a declaration to the world, to myself, and to anyone who had doubted me. I had proven that I was more than the girl my parents tried to mold and dismiss. I had become someone entirely my own, and that, above all else, was enough. This was it, the moment where I stood on my own, with nothing to prove to anyone but myself. As I tried to absorb the magnitude of it all, the host's voice rang out, pulling the room's attention. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting announcement," the host began, their tone brimming with anticipation. "In recognition of tonight's groundbreaking work in education and sustainable chemistry, a generous and anonymous donor has pledged a $2 million grant to the recipient of this award." The room fell silent, and I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. My heart raced as the words settled over me. $2 million. The sheer weight of the number was surreal, almost too overwhelming to comprehend. This wasn't just recognition, it was a life-changing gesture of trust and belief in someone's potential. But it wasn't mine, at least, not officially, not yet. The host continued, "This extraordinary contribution is intended to support the recipient's continued research efforts and to further their impact in education." I blinked, stunned, as the words echoed in the room. The announcement wasn't directly for me, it was for the recipient of the award, whose name had yet to be revealed. Still, the atmosphere shifted, and I couldn't help but notice the charged energy in the air. This wasn't just an award, it was a transformation for whoever received it. As I tried to process everything, my gaze wandered over the crowd, their faces a mixture of anticipation and polite admiration. Then I saw him, near the back, beside the exit. My father stood up abruptly, his face twisted with something that looked like disgust. For a brief moment, our eyes met. Then he turned sharply and made his way toward the door, his movements swift and deliberate. He didn't even stay to hear my name. I froze. Anger, disbelief, and a sharp pang of bitterness rose in my chest. This was the moment I had dreamed of, validation for everything I'd worked for, an acknowledgement of my journey, and he couldn't even bring himself to remain in the room. The man who had rejected me, kicked me out of his house, and dismissed my dreams was walking away, just as the pinnacle of my success unfolded. The host's voice broke through my thoughts. "We are incredibly fortunate to not only have a generous donor for tonight's award, but also a longtime supporter of education and sustainable chemistry. This $2 million grant, made possible by Mosaic Fertilizers, is a testament to the power of innovation and dedication in advancing our field." Mosaic Fertilizers, my father's company. I felt the air leave my lungs as realization struck. The donor funding this grant, the crowning achievement of my career, was tied to the man who had spent years undermining my dreams. The irony was almost too much to bear. He hadn't known it would be me standing on that stage. His contribution had been anonymous, routed through the foundation. He thought he was funding someone else, someone he could be proud of. Instead, it was me. My chest tightened as I tried to keep my composure. The applause around me was deafening, yet it felt distant, like a dull hum pressing against my ears. I stepped forward to the microphone, managing a shaky, "Thank you." The words felt empty, too small for what I was feeling. As the applause faded, I couldn't stay. I turned and walked off the stage, slipping through the crowd and out the back door. My feet moved on instinct, my heart racing. I couldn't let this end like this, not with him walking away from the very moment that should have silenced all his doubts. Pushing open the door to the cool night air, I spotted him standing by his car. His back was to me, shoulders stiff with tension. My feet carried me forward before I could think twice. "Dad," I called, my voice cracking. He didn't turn at first. When he finally did, his expression was bitter, the same look I remembered from all those years ago. "What is it now, Rachel?" His voice was sharp, cold. "You think I'm going to congratulate you? Celebrate the fact that you're taking my money?" I stopped a few feet away, my chest heaving. "I didn't know it came from you," I said evenly, "and I didn't ask for it." He sneered. "No? Well, it's yours now. Enjoy it. But it doesn't change a thing. You're still the failure I kicked out of my house. No grant, no award will fix that." The words hit me like a slap, but this time, they didn't cut as deep. I looked him in the eye, steady and unflinching. "I don't need it to. I built my life without you, and I'll keep building it. This grant isn't about you, it's about what I've earned." For a moment, he said nothing, then, with a dismissive shake of his head, he turned and got into his car. I stood there as he drove away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. That night, I made a decision. The $2 million grant wasn't my victory, it was a reminder of everything I had left behind. I donated the entire amount, every last cent, to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. They deserved a chance to create their own future, free from the burdens of judgment and expectation. As I pressed the final confirmation on the donation, I felt a quiet sense of peace. My father's money didn't define me. His approval didn't validate me. My legacy would be my own, and that was worth far more than any grant.
I found out I have a serious sickness called leukemia, and the doctors say I need to stay in the hospital for a long time to get better. But when I told my family, they turned their backs on me, saying I deserved it. That's when it hit me. They don't really care about me. When I said I wanted to stop being part of their lives, they were happy about it, but they haven't realized yet how much they rely on me. My name is Sally, and I'm a stay-at-home mom in my 40s. My husband Michael and I have been married for almost 50 years. We have a daughter named Mia who just started middle school. Right now, I live with Michael, Mia, and my mother-in-law. Michael's mom raised him by herself after her divorce when he was young. Maybe she spoiled him too much because he's pretty selfish. Living with my mother-in-law made me see a side of my husband I hadn't noticed before we got married. When my husband found out I was going to have a baby, he was really happy. He couldn't believe it at first, but then he thanked me and said we would face any challenges together. I promised to do my best. But that joy didn't last long. When we found out we were having a girl during a checkup, my mother-in-law said something really hurtful to me. She said, "You never cook meat, do you?" I tried to explain that I cook a balanced diet, but she wouldn't listen. She even said that maybe the reason the baby was a girl was because I didn't eat meat. I was shocked and hurt. She kept saying we only needed boys and that having a granddaughter was the worst thing. She even called me useless. I tried to tell myself that as long as the baby was healthy, it shouldn't matter if it was a boy or a girl. But as time went on, my hopes were crushed. My husband started acting distant too, maybe because he was listening to my mother-in-law. He began treating me differently, and it hurt. "Michael, do you want to go shopping for baby stuff when you're off next?" "Do I have to? It's our baby, right?" "I want us to pick things out together." "Fine, but let's stick to the basics. Babies cost a lot, and we need to save." Then buy what you want with your own money. I had minimal income during maternity leave. I have to save for our child's future and cover clinic bills and baby expenses. I had to go along with what Michael and my mother-in-law said and only get the necessary baby stuff. I worried they wouldn't love our daughter when she arrived. But after Mia was born, Michael and my mother-in-law adored her. They loved her even more than I expected, so I stopped worrying. I planned to focus on parenting for a while. But when Mia turned 2, Michael told me to go back to work. I thought it would be okay since my mother-in-law loved Mia too. But when I returned to work, both my mother-in-law and Michael showered even more love on Mia. Michael started spoiling her, just like my mother-in-law had spoiled him. I tried to teach Mia right from wrong with love, but it seemed she didn't see it that way. Before I knew it, Mia didn't like me and preferred to be with my husband and mother-in-law. "Hey Mia, it's time for kindergarten. Let's go together." "I don't want to go with Mommy. I want Grandma." "Mia, Mommy has to work too. Let's go to kindergarten together, okay?" "I hate Mommy. I love Daddy and Grandma." "Mia, please don't say that." "No, Mommy, just go away." Mia's words were really hurting my feelings. My mental health was suffering because of it. But my husband and mother-in-law didn't try to stop her. Instead, they looked at me like I deserved it. These tough times continued for about 10 years. Even in middle school, Mia hasn't changed. She avoids me and sticks to my husband and mother-in-law. And because of that, she's become uncontrollable. She screams and breaks things when she doesn't get her way. When I try to discipline her, she yells back at me. "Mia, can we talk? Did you take money from my wallet?" "Yeah." "So what? You're my mom. You can give me money, right? Taking without asking is wrong. Please give it back." "No way. It's your fault for not getting me the Gucci wallet. I want it for my birthday. You're only in middle school. You don't need expensive things yet. I can get them when you're older." "I want it now. Why don't you understand, you old hack?" "Mia, don't talk like that. You're so annoying, Grandma. Mom is being mean to me." When I scold her, Mia turns to my mother-in-law for help. And my mother-in-law sides with her, blaming me too. "What's wrong, Mia? Did Mom upset you again?" "Listen, Grandma, she won't get me the Gucci wallet for my birthday, and she won't give me money either. Can you believe it? That's not fair. Your mom is being stingy. Grandma will get you the wallet next time, okay?" "Yay, thank you, Grandma." "You're welcome." "I love you, Grandma." Mia happily hugged my mother-in-law. Branded stuff is too much for her age, I thought. I disagreed with my mother-in-law. "Wait, Mom, Mia is still in middle school. Shouldn't we hold off on buying her expensive things?" I suggested. "But maybe not yet. You're so stingy. I feel sorry for Mia having you as her mom," my mother-in-law snapped back. Every day, my mother-in-law spoiled Mia, buying her whatever she wanted. My husband did the same, filling our house with expensive stuff Mia barely used. Besides Mia's issues, there was another problem in our house. My mother-in-law's spending. I noticed she kept buying strange rings and bracelets. When I asked, she said a friend recommended them, but I suspected it was an MLM scheme. I wondered where she got the money since she was always buying things for Mia. Turns out, she was borrowing from banks. When I confronted her, she brushed it off, saying it wasn't my concern. I grew to hate dealing with family problems, so I threw myself into work, often working late. My husband and mother-in-law criticized me, but I didn't care. I just didn't want to be home. Then one day, I collapsed at work. Tests revealed I had leukemia, likely brought on by stress. I needed long-term treatment, so I was hospitalized. I called my mother-in-law from the hospital. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I collapsed at work. I've been diagnosed with leukemia, and I need to stay in the hospital." "You have leukemia?" I hoped she'd be at least a little concerned about my illness. But that hope quickly faded. "It's a good thing you finally got seriously sick." I was shocked by my mother-in-law's response. What are you saying?" I asked. "I've been annoyed with you every day. This serves you right," she said callously. "That's a horrible thing to say. Hold on, let me talk to Mia." I asked to speak to Mia and my mother-in-law handed her the phone. "What?" Mia's response was something I never expected. "Mom, are you sick?" she asked. "I'm sorry, Mia. I have to stay in the hospital for a while," I explained. Mia's reply crushed me even more. "I'm actually glad. It's better without you bothering us. You're always mean to me. That's why you got sick. You deserve it. Are you serious right now? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's incredibly cruel. Everyone would be happier if I stayed sick. I have to tell Dad about this, I said to Mia before she hung up the phone. In that moment, I felt like giving up on my family. I had reached my breaking point. I decided I would be the one to cut ties with them. Mia was my daughter, but I endured so much pain to bring her into this world. I had hoped to raise her to be a good person, but her behavior was a combination of her innate personality and how my husband and mother-in-law raised her. Some might find it unthinkable for a parent to walk away from their child, but despite our blood connection, I couldn't forgive their behavior any longer. I called my parents and asked them to bring clothes because neither my husband, mother-in-law, nor Mia had visited me during my hospital stay. Months later, after successful treatment and full recovery, instead of returning to the house I shared with my husband, I returned to my parents' house and sought advice from a lawyer about getting a divorce. My mother-in-law and Mia agreed right away. Michael was hesitant at first, concerned about public perception, but eventually agreed under pressure from my mother-in-law and Mia. Since he cooperated, I was able to get a divorce and claim compensation. About 7 years passed. I moved out of my parents' house and lived near my workplace, healthy and energetic. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from Michael. His voice sounded exhausted, and he quickly jumped into his problem. "Hello, Sally, can you come back?" "What? Why all of a sudden? Things are tough for me right now." "What do you mean?" "My mother, she's in a huge amount of debt." Michael had just found out about my mother-in-law's debt and reached out to me for help. The debt, which had been ignored for so long, had grown to a significant sum, and my mother-in-law could no longer keep it hidden from Michael. To my ex-husband's anxious plea, I replied calmly, "You're only noticing now. She's been in debt since I was there, from way back. It seems she got caught up in an M&M scheme. All the money she spent on spoiling Mia was borrowed from banks. I can't believe it. I had no clue. I tried to warn your mother several times, and I even tried talking to you about it. But every time, you just brushed it off. But not telling me about the debt is terrible, isn't it? If I had known earlier." "Don't say that now. After all, I was in the hospital, and none of you even visited me once, remember? I'm sorry for that. Just help me out this once." "What are you talking about?" I snapped, losing my patience. My emotions boiled over, and I found myself shouting at Michael. "Do you think you can just apologize and everything will be okay? When I was sick and needed help, you abandoned me. I regret ever marrying you." My anger subsided, replaced by a sense of release. I had finally let out everything I'd been holding in. "You should end up in debt like your mother and suffer for once. Please, calm down. I'll apologize." "Shut up. It's disgusting to start relying on your divorced ex-wife now." In the background, I could hear Mia's voice. Then she took over the phone, sounding sad. "Mom, Grandma's in trouble because of her debts. Please help us." "It's not my problem. Don't ask me for help." Mia didn't give up, despite my quiet refusal. "Dad's struggling to repay Grandma's debts. I might not be able to afford college tuition and might have to drop out. Is that okay?" "So, Mom, why are you acting like this is someone else's problem? Your own daughter is in trouble." "Daughter? Who?" Mia's words made me chuckle. Just as she faced trouble, she emphasized she was my daughter, even though she never called herself that before. "What's so funny?" Michael asked. "I was just thinking about how you suddenly claim to be my daughter when you're in trouble, after calling me names all this time. That's not fair. I'm your biological daughter who's in trouble, But I don't have a daughter." "What?" "No, Mom. I made that decision 7 years ago when I was hospitalized. I don't need a family like you anymore. We're divorced, so we're just strangers now, okay?" "Mom, please don't say that." "Stop. Don't call me Mom because I'm not your mother. You should live happily with your father and grandmother who's in debt. Don't ever contact me again. You're just a burden in my life." With that, I ended the call and blocked their numbers to ensure they couldn't reach me again. After that, I heard that my ex-husband and mother-in-law were working tirelessly to repay their debts. They sold everything they owned, but it wasn't enough. They were struggling to make ends meet and even struggled to eat properly. My daughter couldn't afford her tuition and had to drop out of college. The expensive items she had were sold to pay off debts, leaving her with nothing. It seems even she is working to repay her grandmother's debts. It's heartbreaking to see my daughter facing such hardships compared to her peers. They really are foolish and helpless. They brought this upon themselves. As for me, I've purchased an apartment close to my workplace. I intend to invite my parents and live peacefully as a family of 3. From now on, I want to cherish each day with my true family and live happily.
The move is finally complete, yet Charles, my father-in-law, utters his disdain without bothering to address me by name. His usual arrogance is unmistakable, and though he doesn't explicitly call me out, it's evident he's directing his words at me. I've endured his attitude until now, but I've reached my limit. As I pause from wiping the table, I shoot a defiant glare at Charles, who doesn't even bother to meet my gaze. "I'll be out by today," I declare, and Charles responds with a mocking laugh, reveling in his satisfaction. His words cut deep, branding me as a mere parasite and trash. He envisions a life refreshed once I'm gone, oblivious to the profound changes his own lifestyle has undergone over the years. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Grace, and I recently turned 40. I'm married to William and currently residing with my in-laws. Despite several years of marriage, we remain childless, and there's no intention or possibility of having children. The harsh truth about William's infertility surfaced shortly after our marriage registration. Had I known from the start, I might have reconsidered our union. The revelation struck me like a pit of despair. All our dreams of building a happy family together were shattered. William, with apparent sincerity, had discussed our future children, even contributing to naming them. Little did I know, it was all a facade, a betrayal concealed beneath the guise of a promising future. Despite the profound disappointment, divorce wasn't a simple option for me. We had committed to being a family with the in-laws, who we considered our parents. Reporting a divorce a day after joining the family felt like a breach of trust. Living with the in-laws only intensified the inevitable question of when we would have children. Upon revealing our infertility, the in-laws reacted with fury. To them, a woman unable to bear children was deemed useless and deserving of immediate expulsion. Charles, my father-in-law, took the lead in treating me as a servant, stripping away any semblance of dignity. In their house, I was perpetually relegated to eating alone in the kitchen. I became part of the leftover disposal crew once the in-laws and William had finished their meals. No matter how much effort I put into cooking delicious food, all I received were the scraps left behind by them. Since getting married, I hadn't enjoyed a single satisfying meal. My weight steadily dropped, and within 6 months of marriage, my wrist bones were protruding. Initially, mother-in-law Madison bore the brunt of Charles's tirades, but once I joined the family, his focus shifted to me. Madison seemed relieved by the change. She smiled more often. William once remarked that she felt relieved not to be Charles' target anymore. Despite never smiling around Charles, Madison's demeanor improved in his absence. Charles's tyranny extended beyond targeting me. Upon learning of our infertility, he commanded me to work from dawn to dusk, deeming me lacking as a woman. I had always intended to work after marriage and had no desire to prolong my stay in their house unnecessarily. Balancing early morning chores, seeing everyone off, and heading to work proved challenging, but having a job with flexible hours helped. Despite my efforts, Charles discarded my food without tasting it, citing its appearance as the reason. Neither William nor Madison complained, choosing instead to remain silent. Despite my grievances, conversations during meals were sparse, and I often wondered if they truly enjoyed eating in silence. I had no choice but to maintain a facade of harmony with the in-laws, playing the role of a dutiful wife. As someone without parents, the weight of divorce seemed unbearable. However, Charles's demand that I contribute all my earnings to the household expenses crossed the line. While I intended to contribute, His insistence on full control over my earnings felt absurd. Protesting was futile. Charles's decisions were absolute. It seemed easier to comply, appeasing him and sparing myself the sight of Madison and William's saddened expressions. The root of the marital issues lay with Charles, whose oppression and torment overshadowed everything else. While Madison used to manage the household finances, the responsibility fell on me after marriage, a task I found overwhelming. "Isn't this too much for Grace?" Madison dared to question, only to be silenced by Charles's authoritative command to shut up. I had been dismissed in Charles's eyes, and Madison and I, as women, were deemed worthless, stripped of the privilege to voice our opinions. Taking over the household ledger from Madison initially shocked me, but after several years, I grew accustomed to it. Perhaps the acceptance stemmed from having an additional breadwinner in the house. Charles, however, began spending more recklessly, justifying it as work-related expenses, increasing his nights out, and embarking on trips with Madison and William, excluding me. This sudden change in their behavior marked a departure from the past. Despite the years that had passed, Charles continued to treat me as an outsider, labeling me a parasite or trash. In my younger years, I endured the peace that came when Charles wasn't home, not minding my role as a mere housekeeper. However, as I approached 40, I found his behavior intolerable. The fear that once kept me silent waned, and I started speaking up. Charles didn't appreciate my newfound assertiveness, leading to resentment and a worsening negative loop. Our strained relationship reached a point where Charles constantly badmouthed me, and our interactions were minimal. Whenever he spoke, it was to insult me, creating a dreadful atmosphere at home. Despite the escalating tension, I refused to comply when Charles demanded I leave the house. I snapped back, questioning where I could go knowing I had no parents. Charles, fueled by anger, slammed glasses onto the table, breaking them in the process. Tired of enduring the constant yelling, I deviated from my usual apology and spoke sharply to Charles. I pointed out that he should calm down in his older age. Unaccustomed to such defiance, Charles became furious, asserting his dominance as the master of the house, declaring that a wife like me shouldn't have opinions. Frustration reached its peak, and I confronted Charles head-on, expressing my years-long desire to be treated like a human. He retaliated, escalating to grabbing me by the collar and vehemently declaring that a person like me wasn't needed in his house. The force of his words was enough to shake the furniture, and in that moment, I was pushed away. I should have offered an apology right then and there, but I could no longer contain my frustration. "Fine, you want me to leave. That'll make you happy, right, Charles?" I looked up at him, unable to stay silent any longer. "Yes," he spat out, condescendingly looking down on me. "Then I'll do it," I declared. He stormed off to his room with a loud noise, and I, now a bit calmer, started cleaning the living room that Charles had dirtied. Madison came to check on me with a worried look, but she left without saying anything, returning to her room. I felt like I had no place in this house anymore. Neither William nor Madison would protect me, and years of endurance exploded, making me feel even more isolated. The next day, as usual, I got up early and began my routine. Charles woke up and entered the living room, sitting on the sofa, leaning back, and spreading the newspaper without even glancing at me. Then, without looking up, he asked, "Finished moving yet?" There was no way I could have moved out so soon after yesterday's events. I didn't even think he was serious. I thought it was just a drunken outburst, not something he meant. This was about leaving the house, right? "When will you leave? You have no right to live here anymore," Charles said, still not looking at me. I stopped wiping the table and turned to face him. If he was serious about wanting me to leave, then I would respond seriously. "I'll be out by today," I declared. Madison, who was listening nearby, froze, her worried gaze falling on me. It was clear that once I left, Charles would target Madison again, and she didn't want me to go. However, Charles insisted on my departure, and I had no other option. Charles laughed loudly, likely satisfied that he was getting his way. I rushed out of the living room, quickly packed my things, and left the in-laws' house. I hadn't decided where to go, but I felt liberated. I sent a message to William, who was already out, asking him to divorce me. A lawyer would contact him, and then I turned off my phone. Over the next few days, I found a lawyer and had them contact William and the in-laws. Charles, thinking divorce was inevitable, pressured William into signing the papers quickly. Despite William's reluctance, he signed the agreement under Charles's glare. I signed in front of the lawyer, and the divorce was finalized. We completed the distribution of property, and I was able to claim a settlement for Charles's harassment, which I had recorded. It was worth paying for a lawyer instead of fighting alone. Charles, concerned about his public image, avoided any complications by involving lawyers. Knowing exactly how much money Charles had from managing the household finances, I suggested an amount he could just about afford. With the property distribution and harassment settlement paid in full, I started a comfortable life in my own apartment. I used to hate being alone before marriage, but after living with the in-laws and getting divorced, I embraced the newfound freedom. I've grown to appreciate the solitude of my own time, cooking meals for myself. I relish the tranquility without anyone raising complaints. About 3 months after the divorce, Charles persistently calls, and though I assume it's nothing positive, I choose not to answer. However, a momentary lapse results in me accidentally picking up. "What have you done to my house?" Charles's voice booms through the phone. Instinctively, I move the device away from my ear to endure the loud onslaught. I respond, "I haven't done anything. I left the house as you instructed." Charles remains unsatisfied, continuing to yell. He's upset about notifications regarding issues with withdrawals, blaming me for the problem. I calmly assert that I didn't alter anything and adhered to his instructions, managing and paying everything due. As the realization of why Charles is angry dawns on me, a grin widens on my face. I'm glad he's not here to witness it. Charles, incredulous, questions the financial aspects, asking how much I earned. I recall never revealing my salary details to him. $45,000 take home. I respond. Charles reacts with a sound akin to a squashed frog before falling silent. In truth, my job in sales at an investment trust company involved a commission-based salary, influenced by the returns generated for investors. Unfortunately, much of it vanished due to Charles' extravagant spending. However, I had wisely invested the inheritance from my parents, bringing in some income. Although not substantial, it covered living expenses. During the property distribution, only William's savings were considered since my parents' inheritance and its earnings were not part of it. Charles, insistent, questions whether the standard of living before marriage was the same. As I press on, he begins to get angrier. In the midst of his tirade, I couldn't help but laugh at his absurd demand. With Charles yelling to keep contributing money to the house, I retort, "You're the one who ruined it. Why should I, no longer a family member, give you money?" I chuckle half-heartedly, and amidst my laughter, I heard something shatter on the other end, another one of Charles's tantrums. The realization that I no longer had to clean up after his outbursts made me almost wish he would break more. We were strangers now, no longer family or anything remotely close. I urged him not to act like family and advised him to manage his own finances, leaving him just enough to get by. With that, I bid him goodbye and ended the call. I anticipated more calls, but none came. I thought maybe he was remorseful, but it became apparent that wasn't the case. Perhaps he felt ashamed for not being able to make payments and resorted to ordering William and Madison to borrow money from financial institutions, plunging them into further debt. While payments were made, their unwillingness to change their lifestyle perpetuated the cycle of accumulating more debt each month. I learned about this when William pathetically contacted me, even expressing a desire for reconciliation. Furthermore, William proposed cutting ties with Dad and getting back together. However, such a suggestion seemed hypocritical coming from someone who never stood up for me against Charles' harassment. Despite choosing to stay with William, knowing we couldn't have children, he never protected me. Returning to him was not on my agenda. Charles might have felt suffocated, but that was no longer my concern. I wish they understood the consequences of their actions and endured the suffering now. The in-laws struggled with debt, yet they couldn't bring themselves to reduce their lifestyle standards. Charles, now a contract worker with a reduced salary, joined Madison and William in part-time security jobs. It wasn't just Charles, it was also Madison and William, persisting in maintaining their living standards despite being at their limits. I used to be desperate to protect William, but now I lived for myself. At 40, having children might be challenging, but I remained open to the possibility. Before the divorce, waking up felt like a chore, but now I woke up feeling refreshed, eagerly anticipating a better future in my new life.
When James came home that evening, his face was clouded with worry as he broke the news of his demotion. I nearly dropped my cup of tea in surprise. We had been bracing ourselves for the impact of his company's downturn and the upcoming restructuring, but I never imagined it would affect us so personally. As his wife, I knew my support was needed now more than ever during this tough time. "It's just bad luck," I reassured him, offering a weak smile to lighten the mood. "Times are tough, but I'm still working, so we'll be okay. I'm Anna, 46 years old, and I work full-time in a back office. I live with James, who is 4 years older than me, our high school sophomore daughter, Stephanie, and my 70-year-old mother-in-law, Linda. Although Linda and I occasionally clash, we rarely interact, since I spend most of my day at work. I choose not to let her behavior bother me too much." To Stephanie, I explained, "Your dad's upset about his job, but let's try to keep things normal for him." However, James began to open up about his frustrations more frequently, often directing his anger at those he trusted most, including me. The next day, while I was cleaning the hallway on my day off, James walked by and made a cutting remark. "You've put on some weight since we got married, haven't you?" he said, his tone sharp. I paused, trying to stay calm. "Well, I am 46, and it's normal to gain weight around menopause," I replied, noting that my recent health checkup had shown I was within a healthy range. But his next words stung deeply. "Forget the health checkup. You look unsightly, and it's embarrassing," he snapped. "You're just ugly." Without waiting for my response, he retreated to his room. I stood there, stunned, my side instinctively pinched between my fingers. Yes, I could feel a slight bulge around my waist, but his harsh words felt like a piercing arrow. I was overwhelmed by the intensity of his criticism. It hurt more than I could explain, coming from someone I had supported so fully. I had forgotten I was holding the window squeegee in my hand, and it slipped from my grasp, clattering loudly on the hallway floor. From that moment on, James's behavior toward me grew increasingly distant and harsh. To make matters worse, my mother-in-law, who had overheard our argument, decided it was her place to intervene, and the tension in the house escalated. One day, while carrying a laundry basket up the stairs, I found her waiting at the top, blocking my way. With a disapproving sigh, she commented, "Oh, how dreadful. If only you weren't so overweight, we could pass each other more easily on the stairs. I wouldn't have to wait here, blocked by your size." At dinner that evening, as I served chicken tenders, she pointedly remarked, "Isn't this the kind of food that's contributing to your weight gain?" Before I could respond, she snatched my plate away, insisting only the non-overweight family members should eat. According to my gynecologist, it's normal to gain or lose weight after middle age, yet my mother-in-law, slender as a dried-up tree, seemed oblivious to these natural changes and continued her relentless taunts. Despite growing accustomed to her irritating remarks, what truly pained me was the shift in James's attitude. Since the incident, James stopped talking to me altogether. He offered no gratitude, no compliments, not even during meals I had carefully prepared. He ate in silence, then left the table without a word. Even our shared spaces, like the bathroom and bedroom, felt isolating, as he came and went without acknowledging my presence, turning his back to me each night to bury himself in his smartphone. I felt invisible. One night, summoning the courage to confront him, I asked in a soft voice, "Is there a reason you're ignoring me?" His response was chillingly indifferent. "Not really. I just prefer not to engage much at home," he said coldly. Then, more harshly, he added, "I don't want to be associated with someone in the family who's this overweight. If you really care about me, you'll lose some weight." His words were disheartening. Despite my daily 1.5-mile walk to commute, his lack of understanding and empathy weighed heavily on me. Age was bringing inevitable changes, but his coldness felt like an unbridgeable gap between us. I had been trying my best to manage my weight, especially considering the typical gains that come with age. Yet to James, it was as if my efforts didn't matter. "If you're not seeing results, you might as well not be trying," he snapped. "Don't speak to me anymore." From that point on, he completely shut me out, refusing to acknowledge my existence. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law continued her relentless jabs about my diet. Whenever meat, fruits, or rice appeared on the table, she scrutinized my choices, asking, "Are you supposed to eat that? Do you realize what you're doing to yourself?" I had hoped things would get better, but the strain between us only deepened. Eventually, I found myself limited to eating only salads and boiled vegetables, while James sat across from me, silently pushing his food around, his chopsticks moving mechanically. The atmosphere in our home had grown so cold and distant that it felt like our marriage was slowly falling apart. In quiet moments, I found myself packing a few belongings, wondering if it was time to leave. If this was how James chose to treat me, maybe walking away was the only way to reclaim my dignity. When I confided in my daughter, Stephanie, she immediately offered her unwavering support. "I understand, Mom," she said, her voice full of empathy. "It's hard to watch Dad and Grandma constantly pick on you. I'll go with you. We can live with Grandma and Grandpa, and I can still finish high school there." Her words were a comfort, and I felt a flicker of relief. Perhaps leaving wasn't as impossible as it seemed. Just as I was bracing myself for what I thought would be the end, James approached me with an unexpected smile, suggesting we share a drink together. "Tomorrow's the first day of my demotion," he said, his tone attempting to sound lighthearted. "Let's have a drink, just this once." He even suggested making mimosas for dinner, a gesture that seemed out of place after everything that had happened. It had been the first time he had spoken to me directly since revealing his demotion. As he placed the drinks on the table, I couldn't shake the oddness of the situation. His behavior felt forced, as if he were trying too hard to pretend that things were normal between us. He turned his back to grab the TV remote, and I seized the opportunity to discreetly sniff the drink he had poured for me. The faint but unmistakable scent of something familiar from my own cooking struck me. It was the sharp, acrid scent of vinegar. Anger flared within me. How could he think I wouldn't recognize this? How could he be so cruel, so thoughtless, to serve me this? I had reached my breaking point. Between my mother-in-law's constant jabs and James's prolonged neglect, I could no longer bear the weight of it all. It was time for change, a drastic one, for my own well-being and, more importantly, for Stephanie's future. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "James, could you please fetch the Bauer cheese from the fridge?" I asked, my voice calm and polite, masking the storm that raged within me. "It's from the local dairy farm and it's delicious. It'll be nice for family time." My tone was hopeful, as though this simple request could somehow restore a sense of normalcy to our fractured household. As he headed to the fridge, I took the chance to switch my glass with the one on the seat next to me, the one meant for Linda. When James returned with the cheese, I brightly announced, "Now that we have our snacks, I'll go call Stephanie and Linda. Dinner's ready." My voice rang out through the house, and soon, my mother-in-law and daughter joined us at the table. Tonight's dinner was a departure from the usual chicken noodle soup, Beaufort cheese, and the swapped mimosa, with Stephanie opting for juice. The tension in the room hung thick as we began to eat. "Let's dig in," Stephanie said, trying to break the silence. I took a sip of the drink, noting how intently James was watching me, his smile strained. "Yeah, it's quite good," I said, deliberately loud enough for him to hear. He muttered a response, but I ignored him, focusing instead on my salad. I took another sip of the mimosa, my patience thinning. Suddenly, Linda let out a startled scream, spitting a stream of red liquid onto her plate. It looked like something out of a horror movie. "Wait, Grandma, what happened?" Stephanie exclaimed, jumping to her feet in alarm as some of the liquid splashed onto her salad. "Did you choke? Are you okay?" She quickly grabbed a towel and handed it to Linda, who was wiping her mouth in shock. "What is this, Grandma?" Stephanie asked, her concern growing. "Your mouth, it's like a spicy cobra." Linda, still sputtering, shot a glare at me. "He put it in my drink," she shouted, trying to lunge toward me. But I calmly brushed her hand aside. "It wasn't me. James made the drinks," I replied, pointing the blame squarely at him. The shock on Linda's face was evident. "What?" she screeched, her lips still stained from the sauce. She turned to glare at James, who was visibly trembling. I leaned forward, placing my hand on the table, adding pressure to my words. "You thought you could sneak it into the mimosa, didn't you?" I asked, my voice soft but firm. I could detect the subtle difference in the taste, even if it was slight, and I wasn't going to let him off the hook. The tension at the table was palpable as Linda's eyes narrowed at James, who was now trying to avoid eye contact. The tension in the room was palpable as James's deceptive attempt unraveled, shifting the dynamics of our already strained evening. The taste hit me immediately, that familiar fiery kick of the hot sauce from Georgia, the one with a hint of lime that I'd discovered at a food fair. It was more appealing to me than the infamous death sauce, a little bit of heat tempered by that subtle citrus note. I confronted James firmly, naming the sauce I had recognized from our shared cooking experiences. "Wait, you added that sauce?" I asked, making it clear that I'd detected his sneaky addition to the drink. My mother-in-law probably didn't notice due to the mimosa's aroma, or perhaps she mistook the lime for being part of the drink's intended flavor, but I knew exactly what had been done. It was a malicious prank, and it had gone too far. "Wait, Dad did that?" Stephanie's voice broke the tension, her face a picture of disbelief. James, cornered, muttered a reluctant confession. "I intended for Anna to have it. You should switch it with yours." His words were almost desperate now, attempting to justify the malicious act. "Just because she realized it was meant for me, she wants to pass it off to me?" "I'm not touching that dangerous concoction," I said firmly, refusing to back down. "Why did you think such a stunt was acceptable?" James shifted uncomfortably, offering a pathetic excuse. "You were putting on weight, and spicy food boosts metabolism, so I thought I'd help." I scoffed, dismissing his flimsy excuse. "That's pathetic," I said, disgusted by his attempt to deflect. "Trying to act like you're helping me with a prank like this? Embarrassing." Under the pressure of my glare, James shuffled uncomfortably in his chair. "I'm not crazy. This is a legitimate reason to support your diet. Here, swap your cup with mine and have a taste. I made it for you," he insisted, retreating slightly as he saw I wasn't budging. I stood up, grabbing the cup containing the fiery concoction he'd intended for my mother-in-law and placed it firmly in front of him. "After ignoring me for so long and treating me like I'm invisible, did you honestly expect me to drink something you just made out of the blue? Did that not cross your mind?" The words came out in a cold, firm challenge. "It's childish. Take responsibility. Taste it, since you made it." The tension in the room escalated as I closed the gap between us. The slap of my hand on the table echoed through the room, sending a shockwave of silence across the space. James, likely trying to avoid the confrontation, stood up and stepped back. Amidst the stifling silence, a quiet but firm voice cut through the stillness. It was our daughter, Stephanie. Her words were strained, as though they cost her a great deal of effort to say, but she spoke with undeniable conviction. "Taking out your frustration on Mom, who supports you the most when work gets tough, and treating her this way, it's like a childish prank. I shouldn't have to say this, but it's so immature and unbearable to watch," Stephanie said, addressing her father directly. She stood, her eyes never leaving his. "Is it wrong to struggle with weight? Mom wakes up early, walks to work, and even packs her lunch. She's trying. It's not fair to say she's not making an effort. She then turned to face Linda. And you, going along with this? Taking away mom's food, like the chicken tenders incident? It's like high school drama. It's embarrassing. Linda began to offer a confused excuse. That's not it. I'm just concerned about Stephanie's mom not gaining any more weight. I want her to feel good about herself in front of her granddaughter. Besides, Stephanie, like you, is struggling with weight. Stephanie stood her ground. Compassion is about understanding and supporting the other person. It hurts to see mom's dinner taken away, especially when she's upset. That's not passion. Mom hasn't had any health issues at her checkups yet. Taking away her food is just plain mean. Linda fell silent, clearly taken aback by Stephanie's words. The room hung heavy with the weight of her argument. Stephanie turned back to her father. Mom sees her gynecologist regularly, and she stays active. Yet, Dad, you just brush her aside because she's gained a bit of weight. What's up with that? Your indifference creates so much tension in this house. Can't you see it? Her voice cracked with emotion, but the words rang out with truth. The room was no longer silent, and for the first time in a long while, the air seemed to shift. The room was thick with tension as Stephanie's words, full of both frustration and love, cut through the air. Even Aunt Kayla from the cookie ads has a little extra weight, and she's the happiest person I know. Ever heard of happy weight? She exclaimed. If Mom becomes a lovely grandmother like Aunt Kayla, wouldn't that be wonderful? I'd love to say, Mom, you've reached your happy weight when I have kids and she's a grandma. Her words weren't just a plea, they were an impassioned reminder of the absurdity of the situation and the need for empathy within our family. That's my dream. Please don't ruin it for me, Stephanie added, her voice unwavering. Despite the directness of her delivery, her words warmed my heart, like sipping hot milk with cookies on a cold day. It was a painful sight, watching my daughter reprimand her father, but as she continued, her words spoke directly to me. That's part of my dream, so please, let it go, be happy and fulfill my dream, she said. Her plea filled me with warmth, turning the frustration over the weight shaming and the drink incident into something trivial. Tears welled in my eyes. Yes, you're right, I whispered, my vision blurring. Come on, Mom, Stephanie urged gently, patting my back. Let's go. I nodded, wiping my eyes, and retrieved something I'd been holding onto for a while. What is that? Mark asked, startled. After a month of being ignored, I had made up my mind. I have my bags packed. Let's go our separate ways, I said, handing him the divorce papers, my name written in bold. Mark's voice cracked with panic. I just wanted you to lose some weight. If you'd slimmed down like I asked, I would have been happy, he admitted, his voice trembling. But since you didn't, I thought I'd torment you some more. I didn't mean for this. Those who only realize things when it's too late are the immature ones, Stephanie snapped, her words slicing through the tension. Living without her beloved granddaughter isn't a joke, Linda said softly, almost pleading with me. Stephanie, without missing a beat, responded, I don't want to live with people who act like they're in middle school. James, realizing the seriousness of the situation, hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. Okay, I'll taste it, he muttered. He picked up the glass meant for my mother-in-law and gulped it down. The fiery sauce immediately made him choke, his lips turning red. See, I took responsibility, James said, trying to salvage some pride. Stephanie, ever the opportunist, snapped a picture of James and Linda with their lobster-red lips. You both look so ridiculous, she laughed. Then, turning to me, she said, Mom, let's go. I'll follow her lead, I said, standing up and leaving behind the dinner table, now splattered with the fiery sauce and wine cocktail. Mark and Linda, both sporting swollen lips, were left behind. We headed to my parents' house, where I explained everything. Both of them were furious and decided to confront James and Linda. The divorce went through, and in the years that followed, Mark's career floundered, his behavior contributing to a demotion at work. Meanwhile, Linda found herself stuck, living only with Mark. A few years later, I received a call from her, her voice tinged with regret. Things wouldn't be so dull if you and Stephanie were here, she said, reflecting on the 15 years since Stephanie was born. Please come back. I'll stop ignoring you. But I had no intention of returning. Enjoy yourself while you can. Once you have grandchildren, you'll have plenty of physical work to do, my mother teased, smiling. Today, as I walk to work, I breathe in the fresh morning air, my new routine a symbol of my fresh start. My boss drives by and stops, offering me a ride, No thanks, I decline. I'm sticking to my routine. Come on, Anna, get in, he insists, but today's different. I found someone new, someone who respects me. Unlike my past, we both understand what it's like to go through a divorce, I tell him proudly. Being punctual is important, he says with a smile as he drives. I've never been late before, I protest, puffing up my cheeks. He grins, poking my inflated cheek with a playful gesture. How about you give me the time you saved by riding with me today for a little extra conversation? I laugh, always the conversationalist, I tease, enjoying the easy connection. I never asked to be born, but my parents, Wayne and Abigail Billy, made it painfully clear from the start that I wasn't planned. I'm Madison, the second child they didn't want. My older sister, Amber, was the golden child, the one they dreamed of. Growing up in the Billy house was like living in two separate worlds. Amber's world was full of love, attention, and celebration. Mine, a cold, shadowy place filled with indifference and barely concealed resentment. I still remember my 8th birthday as if it happened yesterday. I woke up hopeful, daring to believe this year might be different. Maybe this time they'd remember, maybe they'd care. But when I came downstairs, my parents were seated at the kitchen table, engrossed in a conversation about Amber's upcoming dance recital. Morning, I said, trying to keep the hope from my voice. Mom looked up briefly, her expression blank. Oh, Madison, your cereal's in the cupboard. That was it. No happy birthday, no hug. Nothing. Later that evening, at dinner, Dad finally remembered. Oh, right. Happy birthday, kid, he muttered, not even bothering to look up from his plate. Mom blinked in surprise. Is that today? I thought it was next week. That night, I lay in bed clutching the only birthday card I received, a small note from Grandma Francesca. Her words were like a lifeline. My dearest Madison, happy birthday, sweetheart. You bring so much joy to my life. Never forget how special and loved you are. Love always, Grandma. I read the card over and over, desperately trying to believe her words. But how could I feel special when my own parents barely acknowledged my existence? School wasn't much better. Parent-teacher conferences were an endless cycle of disappointment. Other kids' parents showed up, proud and supportive. Mine always had an excuse. Sorry, Madison, Mom would say, her voice devoid of remorse. Amber has a dance competition that day. You understand, right? I'd nod, pretending it didn't hurt, but it always did. The worst moments came late at night when they thought I couldn't hear. Their voices would drift up the stairs, sharp and cruel. I just don't get it, Dad said one evening. Amber's so bright and talented, why can't Madison be more like her? Mom sighed heavily. I know, it's like she doesn't even try. Remember how Amber was reading at 4? Madison could barely tie her shoes at that age. Their words carved deep scars into me, each one a reminder that I'd never be good enough. I became quiet and withdrawn, retreating into myself because, really, what was the point of trying? The only person who truly saw me was Grandma Francesca. Every visit to her cozy little house felt like stepping into a different world, a world where I was loved and heard, a world where I could just be. When I was 13, I hit my breaking point. Home had become unbearable, and I knew I couldn't stay. One day, tears streaming down my face, I went to Grandma. Grandma, I whispered, my voice trembling, can I live with you? Her answer was immediate, her embrace warm and unwavering. Oh, sweetheart, she said, pulling me close, you'll always have a home with me, and one day, everything I have will be yours. I melted into her arms, feeling safe for the first time in years. I didn't care about inheriting anything, I just wanted to feel loved. When my parents found out, their reactions were predictably indifferent. That tiny house? Dad scoffed. She works at a library for peanuts. What could she possibly offer you? Mom just shrugged, relief evident in her voice. Well, if that's what you want, it'll make things easier for us. Their apathy stung, but it also reassured me that I was making the right choice. They didn't value Grandma's love, but I did. Living with Grandma wasn't easy, money was tight, and we often struggled to make ends meet, but none of that mattered. For the first time, I felt cherished. Grandma attended every school event, always sitting in the front row, cheering me on. My drawings covered her fridge, and she'd proudly tell everyone about her brilliant granddaughter. Under her care, I began to thrive. The shy, quiet girl I had been slowly disappeared. I made friends, joined clubs, and my grades improved. Love and support had transformed me. Everything seemed to be falling into place, until one crisp autumn afternoon when Grandma came home looking unusually emotional. Her smile was there, but her eyes brimmed with tears. "Madison, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling, "we need to talk. It's about my sister, Marilyn. She passed away." I barely remembered Aunt Marilyn, a wealthy and distant businesswoman. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," I said, taking her hand. She squeezed it tightly. "There's more, Madison. Marilyn, she left me everything, her entire fortune. We're millionaires now, sweetheart, multimillionaires." The news spread quickly. It didn't take long for my parents to reappear, knocking on our door one evening. When Grandma opened it, there they stood, Wayne and Abigail Billy, their eyes shiny with tears. "Francesca, Madison," Mom said, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before, "we've made a terrible mistake." Dad nodded, looking unusually humble. "We've been awful parents, truly awful, but we've realized how wrong we were, and we want to make things right." I stood frozen. The same people who had ignored me for years were now pleading for a second chance. "Please, Madison," Mom said, her voice trembling as she reached out to me, "come home. Let us be the family we should have been all along." I turned to Grandma, my heart heavy with uncertainty. She gave me a kind, reassuring smile. "It's your decision, sweetheart," she said softly. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you." After days of agonizing over it, I decided to give them another chance. With Grandma's blessing, I packed my things and returned to the Billy house. At first, it felt like a dream come true. Mom and Dad were attentive and loving, coming to every school event and cheering me on. They gave me thoughtful gifts, not expensive, but ones that showed they were paying attention to what I liked. We even started having family game nights. I'll never forget the first time Dad ruffled my hair after I won at Monopoly, saying, "That's my girl." The warmth that spread through me was indescribable. The biggest surprise was bedtime. Mom began tucking me in every night, something I'd always dreamed of as a little girl. She'd smooth my hair and kiss my forehead. "Good night, sweetheart," she'd whisper. "We love you so much." Even Amber seemed different. She included me in her plans, introduced me to her friends, and gave me advice about boys and makeup. I wanted so badly to believe it was real, that my family had truly changed and finally saw me for who I was. But a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. Why now? Why only after Grandma came into money? I pushed those thoughts aside, determined to enjoy the loving family life I'd always dreamed of. I called Grandma often, excitedly sharing how happy I was. She always sounded glad for me, but there was a hint of caution in her voice. "Just remember, Madison," she'd say gently, "you always have a home with me, no matter what." Life settled into a new routine. Amber, always the golden child, graduated high school with honors and went off to a prestigious college. Grandma moved into a beautiful new house, finally retiring from her job at the library. And me? I was thriving, doing well in school, with close friends, and even dating Caleb, a boy from my chemistry class. One Thursday evening, I had a date with Caleb at the local diner. I spent hours getting ready, changing outfits and redoing my makeup, feeling nervous but excited. But as I sat waiting at the diner, my phone buzzed. "Sorry, Madison, something came up, can't make it tonight." Disappointment sank in, and I left the diner early, heading home. The house was quiet when I arrived, so I used my key to avoid waking anyone. As I walked past Dad's study, I heard voices. I was about to announce my return when Mom's voice stopped me cold. "I don't know how much longer I can keep up this act," she said, her tone sharp with frustration. "I never wanted her in the first place, and pretending to love her is exhausting." I froze, my heart hammering. Pretending to love me? Dad's response turned my stomach. "We just have to be patient. Once Mom passes, all the money will go to Madison. If we play our cards right, we can convince her to share it with us. Just think of the life we could have." Their words shattered me. Every moment of love and acceptance had been a lie, a calculated performance for Grandma's fortune. Tears welled up as the truth sunk in, crushing the fragile hope I'd been clinging to. I took out my phone and hit record, unable to stop myself from capturing their betrayal. When I couldn't bear to listen any longer, I walked back to the front door, took a deep breath, and slammed it loudly. "I'm home," I called out, forcing my voice to sound steady. Mom and Dad appeared almost instantly, their faces plastered with smiles and fake concern. "Madison, sweetie, you're back early," Mom said, her brow furrowed in what I now recognized as insincere worry. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I muttered. Caleb cancelled. Something came up. Their reactions were perfect, too perfect. Mom clicked her tongue sympathetically, and Dad gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. I had to fight the urge to recoil from his touch. That night, I lay awake for hours, their cruel words replaying in my mind. By morning, I had made my decision. After they left the house, I packed a duffel bag with my clothes and a few meaningful keepsakes. Without looking back, I left the Billy house and went straight to Grandma's. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with my bag, her eyes widened. "Madison, what's wrong, sweetheart?" I couldn't hold it in any longer. Tears poured down my face as I pulled out my phone and played the recording. As Grandma listened, her expression shifted: shock, disbelief, and finally, a deep, simmering anger. "Those conniving, heartless," she stopped herself, taking a deep breath before looking at me with soft, loving eyes. "Don't you worry, honey, we'll give them a surprise they'll never forget." She pulled me into a tight hug, and for the first time since hearing that awful conversation, I felt safe. That evening, my phone buzzed incessantly, calls and messages from Mom, Dad, and even Amber. At first, I ignored them, but eventually, I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice cold. "Madison," Mom's frantic voice came through. "Where are you? We've been so worried." I almost laughed at the irony. "I'm with Grandma," I replied calmly, "and we'd like to invite you all over tomorrow for a family conversation." There was a long silence before Mom stammered. "Of course, we'll be there, Madison. Honey, whatever's wrong, we'll fix it." I hung up before she could continue. Fix it? They had no idea what was coming. The next evening, the air was heavy with tension as the doorbell rang. Grandma gave my hand a reassuring squeeze before answering. Wayne and Abigail Billy stepped inside, their faces full of fake concern and affection. "Madison, sweetheart," Mom began, reaching out to me. I stepped back, watching confusion flicker across her face. Grandma's voice was calm but firm. "Please, have a seat. We have a lot to discuss." As they sat down, Dad's eyes darted around, taking in the signs of wealth. "Mom, what's this about? Is everything okay?" Without a word, I placed my phone on the table and pressed play. Their voices filled the room, cold, calculating, and damning. The effect was immediate. The color drained from their faces as they sat, wide-eyed and speechless. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Then they both began speaking at once, their voices a jumble of excuses and apologies. Grandma raised her hand, silencing them. When she spoke, her voice trembled with disappointment and barely controlled anger. "I hoped, truly believed, that you had changed," she said, her words deliberate and heavy. The realization was a tidal wave, washing over my parents as Grandma delivered her verdict. "I had considered dividing my estate among all of you," she said, her voice unwavering, "but now I see clearly, everything I have will go to Madison, alone." Their faces fell, struck by the full weight of her words. Panic flickered in their eyes as the reality of their failed scheme set in. It wasn't just the money they'd lost, but also any chance of being part of a family grounded in love and trust. "Please, you have to understand," Mom's voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. "We made mistakes, but we love Madison. We can fix this." She reached out, desperation etched into every word. When begging failed to soften Grandma's resolve, their tone turned venomous. Dad's face twisted with fury. "You can't do this. We're her parents, we have rights. We'll make sure you never see her again, Francesca." Their threats didn't faze me. For the first time, I felt a calm certainty about what I needed to do. "I'm filing for emancipation," I said, my voice steady. "Grandma will be my legal guardian. You won't have any control over me anymore." The shock on their faces would have been almost comical if it weren't so tragic. They looked between me and Grandma, realization dawning that their carefully laid plans had not just crumbled, they had completely backfired. "I think it's time for you to leave," Grandma said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. She stood and gestured toward the door. After a moment of hesitation, they left, their defeat palpable. When the door closed behind them, I released a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Grandma enveloped me in a warm hug, and for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of peace. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Grandma hired the best lawyers to help secure my emancipation and transfer guardianship to her. I had naively believed my parents would step aside once their deceit was exposed. I was wrong. Wayne and Abigail fought bitterly to retain control, clinging to the hope of accessing Grandma's wealth. But the evidence against them was overwhelming. Years of neglect and emotional abuse became the foundation of our case. Teachers from my schools testified about their absence, how they never came to parent-teacher conferences or attended my school events. My third-grade teacher, Mrs. Randy, recounted the time I won the spelling bee and no one from my family showed up to celebrate. Even neighbors came forward, painting a stark contrast between the extravagant parties my sister Amber enjoyed and my overlooked birthdays. The final hearing came quickly. To my surprise, Amber walked into the courtroom, slipping quietly into the back. When she took the stand, her testimony dismantled the last remnants of my parents' defense. "Yes, Your Honor," Amber said, her voice calm and deliberate. "I knew about my parents' plan to use Madison to gain access to Grandma's money. The sudden kindness, the sisterly bonding, it was all part of the act." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. I sat frozen, struggling to process her words. She met my gaze briefly, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But it was too late. Her admission was the final blow, severing any hope of reconciliation. The judge's decision was swift and unequivocal. Grandma was granted full guardianship, and I was emancipated from Wayne and Abigail Billy. As we left the courthouse, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in my life, I was free. The mansion I now called home became more than just a physical refuge, it was a sanctuary where I could heal and rebuild. Grandma's love was a constant, her encouragement a beacon as I navigated my new life. I poured myself into my studies, no longer burdened by the need to prove my worth to indifferent parents. For the first time, I was living for myself. Grandma supported me in every way she could, offering opportunities one had only dreamed of. But it was her unwavering belief in me that truly changed my life. "You can be anything you want to be, Madison," she'd say, her eyes sparkling with pride. "The world is yours." Together, we traveled the globe. In England, I fell in love with art and architecture. On a safari in Africa, I discovered a passion for wildlife photography. Each experience unearthed new facets of myself, helping me grow into the person I was always meant to be. But the most transformative work happened in the quiet office of Dr. Lucas, my therapist. Twice a week, I unpacked years of pain and learned to navigate my emotions. "It's okay to be angry," she told me once. "It's okay to grieve the family you should have had." Slowly, I began to trust again, not just others, but myself. The night before my high school graduation, Grandma and I sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. She reached over and took my hand, her expression tender. "I'm so proud of you, Madison. You've been through so much, and look at you now, you're stronger and more beautiful than ever." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. You saved me." She shook her head with a gentle smile. "No, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just gave you the space to do it." The next day, as I stood on the stage accepting my diploma, I heard Grandma's cheers above everyone else's. A wave of peace washed over me. My past no longer defined me. Instead, it had forged me into someone stronger, ready to embrace the future. Looking out at the crowd, my eyes met Grandma's. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I wouldn't face them alone.
My name is Alice, and I'm a 33-year-old sales executive at an e-commerce company in Winona. I have a happy family with my husband Scott, our son Oliver, and my mother-in-law Ruth. I had a happy childhood in Philadelphia, but I got married young at 18 while still in college studying business management. My parents, who loved me very much, were worried about me getting married so early, but I was too in love to think about the consequences. My boyfriend seemed perfect, and we rented a place to live. We worked multiple odd jobs to make ends meet since our families cut us off. We had our first child when I was 19. At first, everything was going well, and we managed our parenting duties just fine. But after Oliver was born, things changed. My husband's father died in a car accident, and his mother had a mental breakdown from the shock, later being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Not being allowed to see his parents deeply affected my husband. I supported him, but he eventually quit his job and started gambling and became abusive. I left him when he hit our 5-year-old son. I started over, got my current job, and decided to take a break from relationships to focus on myself and my son. After a year, my best friend invited me to dinner with her and her fiancé. At the restaurant, a handsome man with warm hazel eyes asked if he could sit next to me. It was Scott. We met again at my friend's wedding but barely spoke. At the end of the evening, Scott told me I looked stunning in my gown. We went for a walk, talked about our careers, hobbies, and families, and eventually started dating and got married. Scott has been a loving father to Oliver, who considers him his real dad. Every year on Oliver's birthday, we visit a new city. Even my mother-in-law, Ruth, loved Oliver, but things changed when I got pregnant. One day at Walmart, I overheard Ruth telling the cashier to check the fruits carefully because her pregnant daughter-in-law, me, shouldn't get sick. When the cashier congratulated her on her first grandchild, Ruth replied, "It will be my first real grandchild. I have a step-grandson who's 10 because my son married my daughter-in-law when he was 5, but I tried to treat him the same." I realized then that Ruth never truly loved my child with all her heart. Ruth also has a granddaughter from her daughter, whom she adores and spoils with gifts. She spends a lot of time with her granddaughter, and anyone who sees them would think Ruth is the best grandmother ever, but only for her daughter's child. One morning, I woke up to the sound of Scott arguing with his mother. Ruth was furious that Scott didn't want to have another biological child. Scott and I had discussed this the night before, and I advised him not to go through with it. Ruth was angry and threatened to end her life if we didn't have another child. Scott assured her we wouldn't make that decision, but she thought I had influenced him. I didn't want a strained relationship with Ruth. She had been kind before, and I didn't know what had caused the change, but I hoped we could win her over with love. I didn't realize that was a big mistake. We were at a farmhouse for Ruth's birthday, and she had already eaten 2 apples but wanted more. Scott refused, and Oliver playfully whispered in her ear, "Don't worry, Grandma." Oliver whispered to his grandma, "I'll sneak an apple for you upstairs." Scott noticed and asked, "What's going on over there?" But my mother-in-law wasn't amused. She said in a stern voice, "Oliver, it's not good to sneak food because of choking. You should never take food without asking an adult." I stepped in and said, "You're right, but he knows it's not okay. He was just joking with you." We laughed, and I added, "Yes, I'm her apple dealer," but she replied sharply, "That's even worse. He shouldn't learn to play favorites." I was heartbroken when I saw Oliver's sad face. He was just trying to bond with his grandmother, who once loved him so much. Scott couldn't take it and said, "Mom, you know how much he loves you, right? He would never do anything to hurt you." She responded, "Yeah, I'm sure you love him very much." One day, I was cuddling with Oliver when she saw us and exclaimed, "Alice, what are you doing? You're pregnant, and you're crushing your belly. It's not good for the baby. Don't do that before your delivery." I wondered if that was really true but decided to stay quiet to avoid any drama. Things got worse on Oliver's 12th birthday. Scott wanted to throw a big party, and we invited many relatives, colleagues, family friends, and all of Oliver's friends. As we were about to cut the cake, my sister-in-law's daughter came crying to my mother-in-law, who was standing next to me. She claimed that Oliver had hit her and pushed her to the ground. My mother-in-law's anger flared up. I could see she was losing control. Before I could calm her down, she went up to Oliver and slapped him without asking what happened. "You've got a lot of nerve, causing trouble on your birthday. Get out of the house," she yelled. Oliver flinched from the slap and ran out of the house crying. I followed him. After some time, I came back and shouted at her, "What are you doing? It's his birthday. At least hear what he has to say." She snapped back, "Stop siding with your son. I've tolerated him enough. He's forgotten where he comes from." Scott, trying to defend Oliver, said, "Mom, you even know what the fight was about. They argued about you." She told Oliver he's not her real grandson and mocked him until he pushed her. My mother-in-law glared at me. I said, "I don't condone his behavior. but I wonder where she learned this from. My mother-in-law was speechless for a moment, and that's when we finally discovered why she treated her grandchildren differently. She said, "It's normal for me not to feel the same affection for him because he wasn't born from my son. The children of my biological children will always be dearer to me than your son. I'm going to love your baby more." That's just how most grandmothers feel, even if they don't say it. I couldn't believe my ears. It felt like a shocking revelation, leaving us all stunned. I couldn't understand where she got this old-fashioned idea. Who influenced her to think this way? Her reasoning left us speechless. Oliver later told me that his grandma used to tell his sister that his brother or sister would be mommy and daddy's real child. I asked him what else grandma had said, and he told me she kept reminding him that his sister wasn't really his sister. I noticed my mother-in-law looked away with a hint of guilt. Now Oliver believes he's extra special to us because we don't want him to feel less important, even though his younger sibling is going to be grandma's favorite grandchild. I confronted her. "What have you been telling him?" She replied, "I didn't lie. It's the truth, and he needs to realize it." Unfortunately, Scott was away on a business trip when all this happened. The next day, I told him everything. He said, "I'm not surprised at all. She's always been cold towards him, sometimes acting like he doesn't exist. I remember she wouldn't even wish him a simple happy birthday, let alone give him gifts. She never shows any interest in his life, never asks how he's doing in school or about his friends." Scott then tried talking to her. "Mom, what you've done is too much. I've accepted Oliver and am raising him as my own, so what difference does it make?" She replied, "It makes a lot of difference, Scott, and it matters to me. Don't you dare judge me. You can't force me to love your son. That's never going to happen. I don't feel like he's my grandchild, and you'll have to get over it." But Scott was firm. "No, Mom, it's you will have to get over not seeing us anymore. We don't need this kind of negativity in our lives, and we definitely don't want our child to experience it. I want you to leave my house right now." Shock and betrayal crossed her face as she stared at her son. Even though I didn't want Scott to live apart from his mother or push her away, I thought it was for the best. We didn't need her in our lives. Being a grandmother to a child who loved her so much was a privilege, and she threw it away by her own choice. Too bad for her. As much as it upset us, we had to make this decision, but she didn't give up. "That's not fair. You can't leave your elderly mother on the streets. I can sue you." Scott replied, "Do whatever you want. You won't see your grandkids anymore. You'll be a bad influence on them." After she said that, I quietly hoped that when she gets older, she wouldn't come crawling back to us for help, because our doors would be closed. If that's how you truly feel about me and my son, then you shouldn't be part of my children's lives. I'll make sure you can't poison their minds anymore. Scott packed her things and she went to stay in Florida. Meanwhile, she kept threatening us over the phone, claiming her rights over the house and her grandchildren. She even bad-mouthed me to relatives, blaming me for separating her from her son. Blinded by rage, Scott and I blocked her on everything after sending a text detailing her actions, which we heard from Oliver and his sister. We made it clear that her behavior was unacceptable and that she wouldn't see her grandkids until they were much older and could understand the world better, so they wouldn't be swayed by her words. We didn't hear from her for a long time after that. One day we got an anonymous call saying my mother-in-law was admitted to the hospital after breaking her pelvis in the bathroom. There was a chance she might never walk again. Scott panicked when he heard this and rushed to be by her side. No matter how good a father Scott was, he was also her son. Though he was angry at his mother for what she did, he couldn't hide the fact that he loved her. "Honey, I think stopping her from seeing the kids is inhumane now. She's old and weak and would want to be with her family in these difficult times. She's just a bit traditional," Scott said, getting emotional. "I met her in the hospital, and she told me that being alone in a hospital bed made her realize how unpredictable life is. She admitted she didn't expect karma to hit her this way." Scott then held my hand and said, "I think we should bring her back home. I don't have the heart to leave her alone at this time, and I can't keep going back and forth to Florida. I hope you understand." I replied, "Of course, honey. It pains me to see her like this. No matter what, she is your mother, and you should be there for her right now. It might be difficult with Oliver, but I'll make sure they get along. I believe she's realized she was wrong." A few days later, she was discharged from the hospital, and we brought her home. Things seemed to be going smoothly, and I thought we were finally back together as a happy family. One day, Oliver was playing around the house when he accidentally slipped and hurt his elbow. A few days later, we were unexpectedly visited by officials from the Social Services Department. They said they had received a complaint that my husband and I were neglecting Oliver because we were excitedly awaiting the arrival of our new baby. They even claimed that the injury on Oliver's elbow was a sign of physical abuse. The officials tried to take Oliver away from us. I was terrified and did everything I could to convince them that the complaint was false, but they wouldn't listen. They took my baby away. I was inconsolable. Scott said, "I wonder who might have given them this false information." My mother-in-law suggested we visit the office and personally convince them to let us keep Oliver. After a lot of effort, we finally got him back and proved that the complaint was malicious. But as we prepared to leave, Oliver softly mumbled to me, "Don't leave me with Dad, Mama, I'm scared of him." This shocked me since Oliver had never said anything like that before. Scott was also surprised and tried to hug Oliver, but he pulled away. One day, when I found Oliver alone, I asked him about it. "Oliver loves his mama, doesn't he?" I asked. "Yes, Mama," he replied. "And he never lies to me, so will he answer honestly?" He nodded. "Why are you scared of Daddy, honey? Did he say something?" "No. But Grandma said that once the baby is here, Daddy will throw me out of the house." I was devastated. We had given her another chance to be part of a happy family, and she had ruined it. I realized she could never truly accept us. I also had a strong suspicion about who might have contacted social services with the false complaint, but I decided to talk to Scott first instead of confronting her. However, fate intervened. Ever since her accident, my mother-in-law had been using a wheelchair. That evening, she was preparing coffee when she accidentally spilled hot water on her leg. She screamed, "Help me, Mother of God," and to my surprise, sprang from her wheelchair and rushed to the kitchen to get some ice. Coincidentally, Scott had just returned from work. We both witnessed her walking, revealing that she had been faking her injury to get back into our home. "Mom, you can walk?" Scott asked, shocked. She froze and slowly turned around. Oh, the impact of the hot water must have helped me walk again. What a miracle. But Scott wasn't convinced. "This is sick, Mom. How could you stoop so low? I idolized you as a child, and this is how you repay me? Just because you despise a little child so much." I had never seen Scott so angry and hurt. "I trusted you and wanted to take care of you after what happened, but this is how you pay me back. Get out of my house now. Please, hear me out," she pleaded. "I did this because I want you to realize we can be a happy family without that child. Your child needs a grandparent. Don't deprive her of that happiness. What will you say when she grows up and finds out she has a grandmother you chose to hide from her?" Scott replied, "I'll take care of that. I'm sure when our child is old enough to understand, they'll see that you being around could do no good." He went to pack her belongings and returned with her luggage. You can't be a good mother if you can convince yourself to do and say such horrible things to a young child, even going so far as to brainwash him. We never saw her again after that. A few months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Scott loved both of his children equally and taught them to always stand by the truth. I often reflected on how I had seen mothers. My mother was a modern, progressive woman despite being from the countryside. She rarely talked about marriage and kids, always pushing me to fulfill my career goals. Unfortunately, I didn't value her ideas back then because I wanted to get married so badly. But life eventually shows you the truth. I learned from my mistakes and from the people I met. Scott and his mother were from the same family but different generations. While I couldn't entirely blame her for her outdated beliefs, I think that if she truly loved Scott, she would have found happiness in his happiness. Her comments and behavior towards my son were unreasonable and unfair. Luckily, Oliver didn't grow up to hate or disrespect her, but he always remembered her as his grandmother. I couldn't imagine what would have happened if she had stayed with us longer and continued her manipulative ways. Fortunately, fate intervened, and we were freed from her toxicity and drama once and for all.
Sprawled on the cold kitchen tiles, I clutched my abdomen, the sharp pain radiating through me as though a blade had twisted deep inside. My breath came in shallow gasps as the agony intensified. Catherine, my young daughter, stood nearby, her face etched with concern. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Through gritted teeth, I forced a calm tone. "I'll be fine, sweetheart. It's just a bad stomach ache," I lied, trying to shield her from the severity of my condition. Footsteps approached, and my husband, Willie, appeared in the doorway. His expression was more annoyed than concerned as he looked at me, suitcase in hand. "What's happening, Amy? Why are you on the floor?" His voice was edged with irritation, not alarm. "I think it's appendicitis, Willie. It's really severe. We need to go to the hospital," I gasped, each word punctuated by waves of pain. He scoffed dismissively. "Appendicitis? You're probably just overreacting. It's probably just indigestion." I tried to argue, but a sharp stab of pain silenced me. Willie glanced at his watch, impatience flickering in his eyes. "I can't miss this trip with Carol. Just call a taxi or something," he said, waving his hand dismissively. My disbelief grew as I tried to speak again. "Willie, I can't even move. Catherine's here. I need you," I pleaded, my voice heavy with desperation. He shook his head, unmoved. "It's probably nothing. Call if it gets worse," he said curtly before turning to leave, his suitcase trailing behind him. I lay there, pain racking my body, with only Catherine's small hands in mine for comfort. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Mommy, don't be sick. You have to be okay," she sobbed. Gathering the remnants of my strength, I pulled her close. "I'm here, darling. Mommy's here." With Willie gone, urgency gripped me. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone and dialed the one person I knew would come, my brother Russell. The phone rang, slicing through the silence of the kitchen. "Hello." Russell's voice was a beacon of hope. "Russell, it's Amy. I need help. I think it's appendicitis. I can't move." I rushed out, each word a struggle against the pain. "Catherine is scared," I managed to add, my voice breaking. After a brief silence, Russell's calm and reassuring voice came through the phone. "I'm on my way, Amy. Hold tight. I'll be there soon." Resting on the cold tiles, I closed my eyes, trying to withstand the sharp pain that coursed through me. Catherine stayed close, her small presence a slight comfort amidst the chaos. In that moment, a resolute feeling took root inside me. Willie's neglect in such a critical time was not just hurtful, it was a profound betrayal. Something had shifted, and I knew things were bound to change. Later, in the sterile hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of machines became a strange comfort. The surgery to remove my inflamed appendix had been successful, but the emotional wound Willie had inflicted lingered. I had called my parents to look after Catherine while I recuperated, and their voices brimmed with concern. The unasked questions about Willie's absence hung heavy in the air. 2 days later, I returned home, the physical pain now a dull ache, a faint echo of what had transpired. Catherine's joy at seeing me again was a bright spot. "Mommy, you're back. Are you all better now?" Her innocent question warmed my heart. "I'm getting there, sweetie," I replied, pulling her into a tight embrace, grateful for her comforting presence. But our peaceful reunion was short-lived. The next day, the doors slammed open, and Willie and his sister Carol burst in, frustration in their voices. "Why didn't you pick us up yesterday? We had to pay extra for a taxi and train fares." Willie's accusatory tone filled the room as he strode into the living room. A surge of anger welled up inside me. "Welcome back. Must have been quite a journey," I responded coldly, meeting his gaze. Willie stopped, taken aback by my frosty reception. Even Carol seemed surprised by the palpable tension. "What's with the attitude, Amy?" Willie demanded. I couldn't hold back any longer. "While you were enjoying your trip, I was in the hospital," I said, my voice calm but charged with anger. I glared at Willie and his sister, whose demands often pulled him away from his family responsibilities. Carol's face turned red and Willie looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about? You're fine, right?" he asked dismissively. "It's not just about being okay, Willie. It's about being there when your family needs you," I retorted, my frustration reaching its peak. Before Willie could respond, the door swung open, revealing Russell, our parents, and Willie's parents. Their eyes, filled with varying shades of anger and disappointment, were fixed on Willie and Carol. Willie's voice trembled as he asked, "Why is everyone here?" His usual confidence had faded under their intense scrutiny. Taking a deep breath, I realized that this moment, this confrontation, would be the turning point for everything that followed. I gathered every ounce of strength I had left to express the hurt and betrayal that had built up inside me. "Willie, you left Catherine and me alone when we needed you the most," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I was in the hospital, and you weren't there." I had shared everything with our families, and as I spoke, Willie seemed to shrink before my eyes. His usual bravado was gone, and his gaze flitted around the room, searching for an alley, but finding none. "It's not just about this incident, Willie," I continued. "It's about all the times you've put Carol before your own family." Russell, his disappointment clear, added his voice to the confrontation. "You've been neglecting Amy and Catherine for far too long." Carol, once so confident, now shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes bounced between the floor and the upset faces around her, her usual arrogance faltering. Willie scrambled to defend himself, offering excuses and justifications, but the room was thick with tension. I could feel it. This was a pivotal moment. I realized then that I could no longer live in the shadow of Willie's neglect. It was time for a change. It was time to stand up for myself and protect Catherine. The meeting ended without resolution, but for me, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would no longer tolerate being overlooked. The message from that day was clear. I had the support of our families, and Willie's indifference had finally crumbled. As our relatives filed out, his parents gave me sympathetic looks, an unspoken admission of their son's shortcomings. That night, as I lay in bed, the day's confrontations replayed in my mind. Anger, disappointment, but also something new, a growing sense of empowerment. Willie's true colors had been revealed, and I knew it was time for me to take control of my own life. The following days were filled with tension. The silence between us was heavy, and though Willie tried to act as if everything was normal, the air was thick with unresolved emotions. During this time, I reflected on the deep unhappiness I had been carrying for so long. The decision I was edging towards wasn't easy, but it felt necessary, like taking a long overdue breath of fresh air after suffocating for too long. One evening, while Willie casually flipped through TV channels, I approached him, a folder in my hand. My heart pounded, but my resolve was unshakable. "Willie, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He glanced up, irritation crossing his face. "What now, Amy?" he asked, dismissively. Taking a deep breath, I handed him the folder. "I want a divorce," I said, each word final and unyielding. "I want a divorce," I declared, my voice steady, though my heart raced. Willie stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face before it was replaced with scorn. "Divorce? That's absurd, Amy," he retorted, a mocking edge in his tone. "You're blowing this all out of proportion." I shook my head, a surge of empowerment rushing through me. "It's not an exaggeration," I replied. "I've thought long and hard about this. You've consistently put Carol before me and Catherine. I can't keep living like this." Willie's sneer deepened, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think you can manage on your own? Don't be naive, Amy." His words were meant to wound, but I stood my ground, my voice unwavering. "I'm not naive, Willie. I know what this means, but I'd rather face the uncertainty than keep feeling invisible in my own marriage." He laughed bitterly, the sound cold and harsh, echoing in the tense air. "Good luck, Amy. You'll regret this when you realize how tough it is out there." His dismissive tone only fueled my resolve. I felt my anger rise, not just at his words, but at the years of being sidelined, of feeling like I didn't matter. This moment, though fraught with challenges, was a new beginning for me, a step toward reclaiming my life, my worth. I kept my composure, my voice steady. "This is my decision, and I'm sticking to it." For a moment, I thought he might argue further, but instead, he just shrugged, a smug smirk spreading across his face. "Fine, have it your way. But remember, I warned you," he said dismissively, turning his attention back to the TV, ignoring me once again. In the midst of the whirlwind of emotions, fear was present, but it was overwhelmed by a deep sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I felt like I was finally taking charge of my own life, stepping out of the shadows. The next day, I began the legal process for the divorce. The paperwork, the procedures, they were daunting, but my resolve was firm. My parents and my brother Russell offered unwavering support, helping me navigate the process with encouragement and guidance. Willie's true nature became more apparent as the divorce unfolded. He was dismissive, uncooperative, and tried to intimidate me into backing down. But I stood my ground. bolstered by my family's support and my own growing sense of empowerment. As time passed, the cracks in Willie's facade grew wider. The charming, confident man I had once married revealed himself to be selfish and manipulative. His true self was exposed for all to see, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. The divorce proceedings were grueling, with Willie's constant attempts to belittle and undermine me. In our meetings, he sneered at my parenting, mocked my future without him. But instead of breaking me, his words only fueled my determination. "Enjoy your struggles, Amy," he taunted during one of our final meetings. "You'll soon see how good you had it with me." His arrogance was infuriating, but I remained composed. I'd rather face challenges every day than spend another moment with someone who has so little regard for his family, I replied firmly. Willie's smug demeanor faltered for a split second, replaced by a flicker of anger, but he quickly masked it with a scoff. I knew then that my resolve had struck a nerve. I was moving forward, no longer tethered to his disdain. When the divorce was finalized, I felt a peculiar mix of relief and anxiety. I was free from Willie, but the path ahead felt daunting. Yet, as I stepped out of the courthouse, a wave of liberation swept through me, revitalizing my spirit. In the weeks that followed, Willie's life began to unravel. His neglectful behavior during our marriage and the news of our separation became hot topics at his workplace. Those who had once admired him now looked at him with pity and disdain. His charming facade had shattered, revealing the pettiness and selfishness beneath the surface. The news of our divorce spread quickly through our community, thanks in part to my well-connected cousin. Willie, who had always been deeply concerned about his image, suddenly found himself the subject of whispered conversations and judgmental glances. Carol, too, was not spared from scrutiny. Her involvement in our marital issues became widely known, and people began to view her with suspicion and disapproval. The once solid bond she shared with Willie now seemed strained and uncomfortable. One evening, as I picked up Catherine from school, I overheard a fierce argument between Willie and Carol outside their house, their voices thick with anger and resentment. "It's your fault we're in this mess," Willie shouted, his frustration palpable. Carol's reply was just as sharp, her voice laden with fury. "How dare you blame me? You're the one who couldn't keep your family together." Their public quarrel stood in stark contrast to the image of unity they once projected. The cracks in their relationship had deepened, and now they were reaping the consequences of their selfish choices. As I walked away with Catherine, a sense of vindication washed over me. It was clear. Willie and Carol were now facing the fallout of their actions, and it felt like a bitter yet deserved lesson. That night, as Catherine slept soundly in her room, I stood by the window, lost in thought. The past few months had been an emotional roller coaster, but they had ultimately led me to a place of strength and self-respect. I had fought for my dignity and for Catherine's future. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I felt ready to face it with newfound confidence. In the aftermath of the divorce, life began to settle into a quieter, yet more fulfilling rhythm. The weight of my unhappy marriage had been lifted, and in its place, I found the freedom to rebuild my life. Step by step, with Catherine by my side, I began the process of starting over. Finding a job was my first priority. The gap in my resume due to years spent focused on motherhood was a challenge, but I remained determined. After several interviews, I secured a position at a small accounting firm. The firm, led by a supportive woman who understood the demands of motherhood, offered a flexible and accommodating work environment, a perfect fit for me. Catherine adapted to her new life with surprising resilience. She thrived in kindergarten, making new friends and eagerly diving into her studies. Her laughter and enthusiasm brought a warmth and joy to our home, a welcome change from the tense atmosphere that had once clouded it. Still, there were moments when the ghosts of my past with Willie resurfaced. One afternoon, while dropping Catherine off at school, I overheard a group of parents gossiping. "That's her, Amy. Her husband left her because he couldn't stand being around her anymore," one of them said. Their words stung, but I held my head high. The gossip and judgment felt like small prices to pay for the peace and freedom I now had. Meanwhile, Willie's life continued to unravel. His pride had taken a hit, and his once pristine reputation was now tarnished. I learned through mutual acquaintances that he had moved back in with his parents, a detail he tried desperately to keep secret. His fall from grace was unmistakable. Eventually, news of Willie's return to his parents' home spread, as did Carol's deteriorating situation. Her involvement in our marriage had alienated many of her friends, and her relationship with Willie was now a shell of what it once was. They barely spoke, their connection strained by blame and regret. For me, the support of my family became my anchor. My brother Russell had moved closer, providing unwavering strength. My parents showered Catherine with love, helping to heal the wounds of the past. One day, while sipping coffee in my kitchen, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain, the struggle, and ultimately the liberation, it had all led to this moment of tranquility. I hadn't just survived, I had emerged stronger and more self-assured. My reverie was interrupted by the doorbell. When I opened the door, I was surprised to find Willie standing there. The look on his face was one of defeat. "Amy, I'm sorry. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone," he said, his voice heavy with remorse. His apology, though belated, validated everything I had done. I took a deep breath, offering a quiet response. "Thank you, Willie, but it's too late. I've moved on." As I closed the door behind him, a profound sense of closure enveloped me. That chapter of my life was over. A new one was beginning, and this time, I was the one writing the story. From the living room, I heard Catherine's voice, full of energy and life. A smile spread across my face as I walked toward her. The future was open before us, brimming with hope and possibility. After my divorce from my husband was finalized, I moved in with my daughter, Natalie. About 6 months later, something unexpected happened. It was my day off, and I was relaxing at home with Natalie when I got a call from my mother. She told me that my ex-husband and his mother had shown up at my parents' house uninvited. I quickly got dressed and went over there. When I arrived, I found my ex-husband and his mother sitting on the sofa in the living room, waiting for me. I had no clue why they were there. "Why are you here at my parents' house?" I asked. My ex-husband, John, surprised me by saying, "I want you to return the money you owe me. My name is Aaron. I'm a 40-year-old office worker. I was married to John for 14 years, and our daughter, Natalie, was born around the time we got married. She's now in the 8th grade. We were a happy family, and I felt sure that we would always have a loving home together." I met John on a blind date and was instantly drawn to his friendly, kind, and cheerful nature. He liked me too, and we stayed in touch throughout high school. We shared our contact details and started dating. After a few dates, a year later, he proposed and we got married. I loved him deeply and was thrilled when he asked me to marry him. I had a close group of friends from high school, and we always came together for big events. When I told them I was getting married, they were all excited and congratulated me. They all came to our wedding and talked about wanting to get married too. Over time, one by one, all my friends from the group got married, and eventually, everyone in our circle was married. We laughed and joked about how our group of friends had all suddenly become adults, with everyone now being married. Then, when I got pregnant, my friends started getting pregnant too, and before long, we had turned into a group of moms. It felt like we were all going through life together, and I knew we would stay close friends forever. I was happy being both a wife and a mother. I also enjoyed my job. After college, I started working in the planning and development department of a big company, and my days were very busy. The job was challenging but very rewarding, and I learned something new every day. One of my mom friends, who stayed at home, once told me, "You're really a workaholic, Aaron, but you also have a great family life. It's like you have 2 lives or something." My friend says I'm a very strong woman, but I really wish I had the endless energy of a strong man. Both John and Natalie helped me unwind and relax at home after a long day at work. When I got home, I would say, "I'm home." Natalie would respond with a cheerful, "Oh, Mommy, welcome home." When she was younger, she would greet me with a big smile and a hug, which made all my tiredness disappear for the day. John would also help me relax. After Natalie was born, John quit his job and started working part-time so I could continue working at my company. He took a job at a cafe and took care of picking up and dropping off Natalie. When I came home, he always had dinner ready. After a long day at work, it's tough to cook, so coming home to a hot meal was a huge relief. John's cooking helped me feel relaxed and refreshed. I would take baths with Natalie and we chat about our day. My life was fulfilling both at work and at home. I could manage it all because John and Natalie were so supportive of my job. Their kindness made me even more dedicated and passionate about my work, and as I achieved good results, I got promoted. With the promotion, I started working more overtime and often came home quite late. By then, Natalie was older and understood the demands of my job, so she could handle some things on her own. John also began working more hours at the cafe. Lately, I've been enjoying exploring different coffee shops and buying their coffee beans. I picked up some today, along with cakes from a new bakery. I suggested we have them with coffee. John has really gotten into coffee. He's been learning about roasting beans and trying different types at his cafe job. That's why he makes such great coffee at home. John and Natalie were both very understanding about my dedication to work, but I didn't notice that our family was slowly starting to drift apart. I first realized something was wrong when Natalie came to me with a concern. "What's up? You wanted to talk about something," I asked her. "Well, the other day, when I went to see a movie with friends from school, I saw Dad with another woman," she said. I was shocked. "What?" Natalie continued. "They weren't holding hands or anything, but they seemed a bit close. Lately, I've noticed Dad talking a lot on the phone before you get home. Sometimes he's so focused on his phone that he doesn't really listen to me. He looks happy while on his phone. At first, I thought he was texting or talking to you, but after seeing him with that woman, I'm starting to wonder if he was talking to her instead." Natalie looked really sad as she spoke. She was already in middle school and sensitive to these kinds of issues, so I knew she wouldn't be able to handle this alone. I was also shocked. The thought that John, who I believed always put Natalie first, might be having an affair was heartbreaking. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I didn't realize we were making you feel this way. I've been too focused on work, haven't I?" Natalie reassured me. "No, it's okay that you work hard, Mom. Don't feel bad about that." I was grateful for her understanding words. "Thank you, Natalie. I'll talk to your dad about this. If it turns out he's having an affair, I think I'll have to get a divorce. Is that okay with you?" She nodded. "I don't like the idea of Dad having an affair. Just knowing that and still being with him would make me feel bad." Seeing Natalie so upset made me realize how much I had neglected my family. I knew I needed to get to the bottom of this issue, especially since Natalie had the courage to bring it up. I hired a private investigator to look into John's possible affair. The results were shocking. John was indeed having an affair, just as Natalie said, and there was photographic evidence to prove it. What stunned me the most was who his affair partner was: Stacy, one of my high school classmates and a member of our mom's group. I was more surprised by this betrayal from a friend I trusted than by John's affair itself. Stacy, a stay-at-home mom and the last to marry in our group, had a young child of her own. Yet she was involved with John and neglecting her own child. When I saw the evidence, I was overwhelmed and couldn't move for a while. If I hadn't been alone in my room, Natalie might have stumbled upon those photos, causing even more turmoil in our family. I wasn't ready to confront John yet, and I definitely couldn't let Natalie see these pictures. I took a deep breath to calm myself down. Then, another friend from the mom's group told me she had changed jobs, which gave me the idea to suggest a get-together. I figured it would be a good chance to see Stacy without her knowing I was aware of the affair. The get-together was planned for 3 weeks later. During that time, I quickly hired a lawyer and began preparing for the divorce. I briefly informed Natalie about what I had discovered and that her dad and I would be getting a divorce. We spent our days off together looking for a new apartment. The day of the get-together finally arrived. I started by asking my friend about her new job, and then we all shared updates about our lives. Stacy still didn't seem to know that I was aware of her secret, and we had a normal conversation. "Everyone's working, so it's good that things are changing," Stacy said. "I'm just a housewife, so I'm stuck in the same routine." "Well, you don't have to work, Stacy, because you have a husband who supports you," one of my friends replied. "I do appreciate my husband, but sometimes I feel a little bored," Stacy admitted. It was time to confront her about the affair. "So, is that why you're having an affair with other people's husbands?" I asked. Stacy and the other friends froze at my comment. Aaron, what do you mean by that?" Stacy asked, her face going pale. "Well, it seems that Stacy is having an affair with my husband John," I said. "What? No way. You must be joking," the other friend said, trying to defend Stacy. Since my friends were protecting her, Stacy took advantage of it. That's right, Aaron. What are you talking about all of a sudden? You must have confused me with someone else, Stacy said, trying to deflect. Oh really? I replied. Then why don't you all take a look at this? I pulled out the photos from my bag and laid them out on the table. My friends stared at the photos in shock. Oh my gosh, they gasped. Stacy, why? They asked. Stacy, clearly caught off guard by the evidence, covered her mouth with her hand. I'm so shocked. Why did you have an affair with my husband? Stacy seemed to realize there was no way out. I'm really sorry. I happened to walk into the cafe where your husband works. I didn't know he worked there at first, but I started going there regularly. My husband provides for me, but he's been neglecting me since we got married. I was feeling lonely. Stacy started to cry as she spoke, but even though she had her reasons, having an affair is unacceptable, especially with a friend's husband. I remained calm and composed, not letting her tears affect me. I'm sorry to everyone else, but I need to tell Stacy that I'm going to pursue alimony from her, I said. I also sent a certified letter about this to your mailbox today, Stacy. Your husband should have already seen it. Oh no, Stacy said, looking worried. How could he do something so terrible? She asked, still in shock. It's far worse to have an affair with a friend's husband when you're married and have a child of your own. You need to face the consequences and make amends for what you've done, I said. Stacy turned pale and nodded. One of my other friends added, We really can't trust you anymore, Stacy. We left the restaurant, leaving Stacy behind. Now that I had dealt with her, it was time to confront John. I was pretty sure Stacy had already contacted him about what happened. When I got home, John met me at the door, looking panicked. What have you done? I just got a call from Stacy. Are you really making our affair public? How could you be so terrible? You acted like a good husband, but you were cheating on me. No, that's not. But Stacy has a family too. How could you expose her like that? It's ridiculous. I responded, It seems people who have affairs think alike. You believe that as long as the other person doesn't find out, it's not a big deal. But what you did was wrong, and it all needs to be revealed as part of your punishment. That's why I'm going to divorce you and seek alimony and child support. With clear evidence of the affair, John couldn't deny what happened and agreed to the divorce. However, he was hesitant about paying alimony and child support. When I hired a strong lawyer and made it clear that I was ready to take the case to court, he finally agreed to pay. So I divorced my ex-husband, sold a house we had been living in, and moved into a new apartment with Natalie. I also pursued alimony from both John and Stacy and received $30,000 from each. Additionally, I secured child support from John. Once everything was settled, Natalie and I started our new life together. The experience was very traumatic for me, but over time, my wounds began to heal. However, about 6 months later, another issue arose. I was relaxing at home with Natalie on my day off when I got a surprising call from my mother. She told me that my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law had shown up at my parents' house and forced their way in without permission. My father was out, so my mother called me in a hurry. I quickly got ready and went to my parents' house. When I arrived, my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law were sitting on the living room sofa waiting for me. I had no idea why they were there. What are you both doing here at my parents' house all of a sudden? I asked. My ex-husband then shocked me with his next words. I want you to give me back the money you owe me. Huh? I never borrowed any money from you. I paid $15,000 for our wedding, remember? You were the one in charge of the wedding, so that money was lent to you. Now that we're divorced, you're claiming it was all a fraud. Honestly, I could sue you for marriage fraud, but for now, all I want is that $15,000 back as a settlement. He made an unreasonable request. My ex-mother-in-law also insisted that I pay him as soon as possible. After the divorce, I knew that John had taken a full-time job at the cafe where he used to work, but the pay there wasn't much. It seemed he was struggling financially, which might explain his unreasonable demands. Well, let me remind you that we both were equally involved in the wedding, and I paid more of our living expenses than you did. So $15,000 is just a small part of what I contributed. Don't bother me with such unreasonable demands. I tried to get them to leave, but they didn't budge. Just then, my father came home. He had apparently received a call from my mother and rushed back. What are you guys doing here? My father demanded. My ex-husband explained the same thing to my father, clearly afraid of him. My father listened quietly but was clearly furious and shocked by John's unreasonable demands. It's your fault for having an affair in the first place. If you're going to make such outrageous demands, get out of here, my father said. He tried to kick them out, but my ex-husband fell to his knees and begged, "Please, Aaron, lend me money. Not only are you demanding alimony, but Stacy's husband is also after me and I can't afford it. Even $10,000 would help." It was shocking to see him begging for money in such a situation. I told him coldly, "No, I can't do that. Go home." But my ex-mother-in-law insisted, "You're also responsible for what happened. You should lend him the money." The situation was escalating, so my father said, "Fine, I'll get the money. Just wait here," and went to another room. "Hey Dad, what are you doing?" I hurried after him, and my father grinned. "Well, I have plenty of money. Since we have it, why not give it to them?" he said, opening the closet and pulling out some cash. This should be interesting, I thought. My father put the bills in an envelope and handed it to John. Satisfied with the fake money, my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law left with pleased expressions. As soon as they were gone, I locked the door and called the police. The two must have realized the money was fake as soon as they stepped outside because they came rushing back, banging on our front door. "Hey, what's going on? This is Monopoly money. I don't want this fake cash," John shouted angrily. I laughed and responded through the door. "Since we have so much money, I thought I'd share it with you." John exclaimed, "You've got to be kidding," and started banging even harder on the door, kicking it with his feet. They didn't realize their actions were only making things worse for them. As John and his mother were kicking the door, the police arrived and caught them in the act. Neighbors gathered around, and many witnessed John and his mother getting arrested. In the end, John didn't get any money but was fined for the arrest and had to pay for the damage to our front door. Additionally, one of the people who saw the arrest was a regular at the cafe where John worked, and news spread quickly. As a result, John was fired from his job. Now, John is struggling to find work and has moved back in with his parents. His in-laws are covering his alimony and child support payments for him. I've also filed a restraining order against my former in-laws. If anything happens, my family can call the police, and they will respond immediately. Now I'm happier than ever with Needly. I'm committed to working hard and enjoying watching my daughter grow up. Thank you for watching until the end. Please subscribe to our channel. See you in the next video.